Okay, now we're streaming live. You may start us off, Izzy.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Governmental Operations. At this time, would all panelists please turn on their video? To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices on vibrate or silent mode. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so via email at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Once again, testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. We're ready to begin.
Today's meeting comes to order. Let me gavel it in. Good afternoon. I am Council Member Fernando Cabrera, Chair of the Committee on Governmental Operation. I want to start off by thanking the co-chairs of the Council Census Task Force, Council Members Carlos Menchaca and Carlina Rivera, for the leadership of making sure that every New Yorker gets counted. Thank you so much. You did a marvelous, marvelous job. And a special thank you to the dedicated advocates with us today who have worked so hard for over a year now to make sure New York gets a complete count, especially under the circumstances you were working with. I want to acknowledge that we had been joined by Council Members Menchaca, Rivera, Kalos, myself, and Perkins. Yesterday's Supreme Court decision was extremely disappointing. Until yesterday, we had until October 31st to get a complete count for New York City. Now, thanks to the Trump administration that is determined to rush the census count at all costs, the count will end on Friday at 6 a.m. That means New Yorkers still have over 24 hours to respond. This is a setback. Let me say that again. This is a setback, but the fight isn't over yet. We have made remarkable progress in raising our count this summer and fall, despite having in-person outreach plans turn out upside down by the global pandemic. As of now, our response rate is a little over 61%, which is only a little over 5 points behind the national rate. In 2010, there was a 14-point gap between the city and the national rate, so we should acknowledge that remarkable success in closing the gap. But let me be clear, but a 61% response rate is still too low. We can do better, and we have some time. I'm calling everyone who's watching right now, go on social media right now. I want you to alert people. Most people do not know we only have into Friday at 6 a.m. So let's do this let's make a wave, a buzz. Let's create some buzz to get more people to fill their census. It is true the circumstances today are different and more challenging than a decade ago. Right as the online census form went live in March, our city became the epicenter of an ongoing global pandemic, and we remain in a state of crisis as we are witnessing signs of a second wave. We saw COVID-19 ravage parts of our community that were largely vulnerable and lower resources. This is the backdrop of today's call to action. We need a complete count of every single New Yorker because we need to make sure that our city receives the resources it needs to address the current crisis and future ones over the next 10 years. The census data are used to calculate federal and state funding allocations, not only for healthcare, but for also schools, SNAP, housing, roads, and other critical safety net programs and infrastructure. The first thing we must do in our fight for federal resources is to complete census count, a complete census count. I also like to call attention to the upcoming presidential election because the census is critical here too. First, I want to make sure everyone listening has a plan to vote. The census count determines how many seats New York gets in Congress, and it impacts state and local redistricting as well. New York City could lose up to 2 congressional seats if we are undercounted in the 2020 census. I'm sure my colleagues have even more to add. So before I hand it over to them, I want to thank the staff that have made it possible, this hearing possible. My committee staff, Committee Counsel CJ Murray, Senior Policy Analyst Emily Forjon and Elizabeth Kronk, Senior Finance Analyst Sebastian Bacci, and Community Liaison John Blasco, my Legislative and Communications Director Claire McLevain, and the rest of the Census Task Force staff, including Finance Analyst Luke Sergili, Unit Head Chima Obituary, and Anthony Perez, Deputy Chief of Staff to the Speaker. Thank you to our data team, Senior Data Analyst Rose Martinez, and Data Scientist Rachel Alexandrov. Big thanks to you as well, to the team of staff across the Legislative Division who are working behind the scenes to make this hearing run smoothly. I will now turn it over to the 2020 Census Task Force Co-Chair, Councilmember Carolina Rivera, for a statement.
Thank you so much, Chair Cabrera. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Councilmember Carolina Rivera, co-chair of the New York City Council's Census Task Force. I want to thank Chair Cabrera for holding today's important hearing. It's been said before, but it bears repeating. Getting a complete count in the 2020 census is absolutely critical to our city's future, especially with what we expect to be a long recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. The Supreme Court just allowed the Trump administration to shorten the count yet again. This blatant effort to exclude immigrants from the census count could lead to an inaccurate count that could negatively affect New Yorkers for a decade. The count ends on Friday at 6 a.m. It is urgent that we count as many New Yorkers as possible in the little time we have left. As we all know, the city is in the midst of a severe budget crisis, so I want to get some facts straight about the importance of the census to our city. In fiscal year 2017, an estimated $121 billion in federal funds flowed to New York State based on decennial census-derived data. Our finance division estimated that pre-pandemic, 9% of our city budget, or $8 billion, came from federal funding. I know many of my constituents rely on the programs that these funds support, such as Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, Section 8 housing vouchers, education grants, and more. Not to mention that we all benefit from federal investments in infrastructure like our roads. Last year, we secured $40 million for census work in the city's budget in collaboration with the mayor's office and CUNY because we knew it was a necessary investment in the future of our city. Today, we're checking in on that investment. The last 6 months have threatened to derail our momentum, but we have not given up. We have many partners and stakeholders who share our vision of a complete count. We have a little over 24 hours to count as many New Yorkers as possible. The stakes couldn't be higher. We look forward to hearing on the incredible ways in which grassroots efforts by local leaders, community-based organizations, the mayor's office, the borough presidents, libraries, unions, faith leaders, the business community, and others have stepped up to bolster the work of our partners at the U.S. Census Bureau in the midst of a truly unprecedented global health crisis. Thank you to my chair, Councilmember Menchaca, for his fierce commitment to this initiative. I'm proud to have worked with you on this once-in-a-decade opportunity to ensure that our city gets the resources that it deserves. Thank you also to Speaker Johnson for putting the Council's 2020 Census Task Force together, to the Governmental Operations Committee staff for planning this hearing, to the task force staff for their consistent efforts to ensure a complete count for New York City this past year, and of course, to my whole entire team for their support. Not only did we make sure that we were accurate in our messaging and reaching people and collaborating with credible messengers and community-based organizations that have done this work for a very, very long time, but we were out in the streets very responsibly, making sure that we were reaching people to let them know how important this effort is. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. And I will now turn it over to the 2020 Census Task Force co-chair, Councilmember Carlos Menchaca, for a statement.
Thank you, Chair Cabrera, and buenas tardes, everyone. I'm Carlos Menchaca. I'm co-chair of the New York City Council's Committee on the Task Force for the Census. And I just want to say thank you to all the incredible staff at the Council, whether you work for one of the chairs or co-chairs or at central staff. I just felt like every left and right turn we made, we were supported by you in these moments of getting data and information out into our communities. None of this could have happened without you. And there's so much that's happening with the administration, and so I want to thank the team on the ground. And we saw you, whether you were holding a pamphlet or a microphone or dancing on a truck. We saw you. And I think there's a lot to celebrate as we get here. But we're going to be asking some questions about how and what happened and what we can do in the next few hours to ensure that we can get a best count. This work couldn't have happened either if the City Council didn't commit the incredible funding. And so I want to thank Speaker Johnson and Finance Chair Drum and the B&T for never, ever saying no to this from the very beginning. And I know it was a big surprise to bring that funding. So we want to look at what that funding did. Today, we are witnessing the devastation that chronic under-resourcing and systematic racism can wreak on our communities. It's no surprise that Black and Brown communities, including immigrants, have been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. They have had to fight for recognition of their inherent worth in society for far too long. When a crisis like this happens, we face this disadvantage. Worse health outcomes happen. We get to compare what happens in immigrant communities, Black and Brown communities, with white communities. Those are all things that we're talking about. And this summer, we have seen yet again that the Trump administration tried to deny immigrants and cities where they live the basic resource and representation they're entitled to. By trying to exclude undocumented immigrants from population counts used for apportionment, the president is saying immigrants don't matter. By trying to shorten the census response timeline and rush the count, the president is trying to sabotage an accurate count for political gain. This is how this administration works, a white supremacy-driven institution. We must fight back by making sure that every last New Yorker is counted, even if we just have ours. The census is a great equalizing force, and you're counted no matter your age, county of origin, a country of origin, race, ethnicity, the language you speak, your sexual orientation, or any other identity. And when you complete the census form, you're saying, I'm here and I count. New York City, as diverse as it is made up of many historically undercounted populations, such as African Americans, renters, limited English proficient individuals, and immigrants, to name a few. Knowing this, the city did secure that $40 million, and we are making that a comprehensive reach into our neighborhoods. Almost half of that funding was set aside for trusted organizations throughout our city to do targeted outreach. This became the Complete Count Fund. The last time we all met, the awardees had not yet been announced. In December 2009, 2019, 157 community-based organizations were selected through a rigorous grant-making process to conduct targeted census outreach. Those organizations spent the first months of 2020 planning for the beginning of the self-response, which was going to happen in March. As Chair Cabrera said, the coronavirus already was making its way through the city at that time. And with New York on pause, the city and our census partners have had to make creative adjustments to those plans that they first developed. The need for a complete count has not disappeared. And so we're making it evident with today's discussion. We are incredibly thankful for our staff. I want to give them one last shout out. But the final thing I want to say is this. What we need to do right now is figure out how we use every resource and even call upon the state for the resources that we have yet to see on the ground in our city and in our state. And so where is that accountability on the state and on us as government to pull those resources down? People are going to be hustling in the next few days until the 16th at 6 a.m. What are we doing to fuel them to get that count? I'll leave it at that. Thank you to my hermana, Carolina Rivera, co-chair, and to my hermano, Chair Cabrera.
Thank you so much to both of the co-chairs. I can't say enough of your efforts, your leadership, and you were upfront and in the cutting edge dealing with this issue. So I salute both of you. Let me recognize that we've been joined by Council Members Powers and Yeager. And now I will turn it over to our moderator, Committee Counsel CJ Murray, to go over some of the procedure items.
Thank you, Chair. I am CJ Murray, Counsel to the Committee on Governmental Operations. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called on to testify, at which point you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists to testify. Please listen for your name to be called. The first panelist to give testimony today will be representatives from the administration, the Manhattan Borough President's Office, the Queensborough President's Office, the United States Census Bureau, and the city's public library systems. For the administration, testimony will be provided by NYC Census 2020 Director and Executive Assistant Corporation Counsel, Julie Menon. In addition, the following NYC Census 2020 representatives will be available to answer questions. Deputy Director Amit Baga, Field Director Kathleen Daniel, and Grants Program Director Allison Grant-Turek. Also available to answer questions for the administration will be Department of Citywide Planning Chief Demographer Joseph Salvo. In addition, testimony will be provided by Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and Director of Immigrant and Intercultural Affairs for the Queensborough President Susie Tannenbaum. For the U.S. Census Bureau, New York Regional Director Jeff Baylor will be providing testimony. And for the public library systems, testimony will be provided by Jin Han Bei from the Queens Public Library, Jay Brandon from the New York Public Library, and Iman Poe Maynard from the Brooklyn Public Library. I will call on you when it is your turn to speak. During the hearing, if a council member would like to ask a question of the administration or specific panelists, please use the Zoom raise hand function and I will call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, which includes the time it takes the panelists to answer your question. Please note that for ease of this virtual hearing, there will not be a second round of questioning outside of questions from the committee chairs. All hearing participants should submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Before we begin testimony, I will administer the oath. Director Menon, Deputy Director Baga, Field Director Daniel, Grants Program Director Turek, and Chief Demographer Salvo, please raise your right hand. I will call on each of you individually for a response. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Director Menon?
I do.
Deputy Director Baga?
I do.
Field Director Daniel?
I do.
Grants Program Director Turek?
I do.
Chief Demographer Salvo?
I do.
Thank you. I would now like to invite NYC Census 2020 Director Julie Menon to testify. Director Menon, we ask that you please summarize your written testimony, which has been added to the public record in full, so as to prioritize time for questions. You may begin when ready.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to thank Chair Cabrera, and I want to thank the Census Task Force co-chairs, Rivera and Menchaca, and all the members of the council here today. I'm Julie Menon, Director of the Census and Executive Assistant Corporation Counsel at the City Law Department. So in the interest of time, I will summarize. I want to say that obviously we speak to you today under the very shameful and maddening situation where the Supreme Court has cut short the census by a full 2 weeks. The deadline, just to be clear, is at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 16th. So we literally have 2 days to reach every New Yorker to let them know that this deadline is indeed the true deadline, and we want to make sure to get every New Yorker to respond. But I will say, despite this troubling decision, and despite literally every single obstacle being thrown at us, including being the epicenter of a global pandemic, I'm incredibly proud to share that our first citywide effort of its kind has achieved a response rate, and I'm using yesterday's numbers because we'll get new numbers today, of 61.4%. So to put that into context, that basically means we have met where we were in 2010 when there was no global pandemic. We beat the US Census Bureau's pre-COVID estimate. They estimated before COVID that New York City would be at 58%. We beat that by 3.4 percentage points. And in addition, we've aggressively narrowed the gap to 5 points. So we're 5 points behind the country. In 2010, we were 14 points behind the country. So that is significant progress and a true testament to the citywide partners, all of the different organizations, elected officials, a true partnership that we had, and to New Yorkers as well who responded. I do want to say, to also put this into context, we are ahead of Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Atlanta, Orlando, Miami, Detroit, Houston, Dallas, and so many other cities. So it's really important to note that as well. So in terms of where we are, and again, I've submitted my full testimony, but in the interest of time, want to be brief on this. Staten Island currently holds the highest self-response rate at 66.1%, ahead of its 2010 rate of 62. At 62.5%, Manhattan currently holds the second highest rate. It is lower than 2010, and it's lower than 2010 in large part because some Manhattanites left the borough during COVID and did not fill out the census. We work very closely with the Manhattan Borough President's Office, with the Board of Elections, and we got absentee ballot information and we mailed those individuals, we phone banked them, and we sent text messages as well to reach out to them. Queens is currently in third place with a self-response rate of 62.3, ahead of its 2010 number. The Bronx is at 62%, and Brooklyn is in fifth at 58.6. But I do want to note that Brooklyn now is 3 full percentage points ahead of where it was in 2010. I'm really proud to report that a large majority of Black communities throughout New York City are exceeding their 2010 performance. So that is really important. I won't spend time going through every single community, but certainly if we look at Co-op City in the Bronx, currently has a self-response rate of 76%, 9 points ahead of the national average. So that's really something very significant as well. I want to talk for a minute about some of the strategies that our team employed post-COVID. So one of the things that we quickly had to do is when COVID hit, we clawed back $1.3 million from a signed contract we had on the subway ads. So we had a signed contract, but we were able to get that money back and pour it into digital and TV. We also had procured before COVID a text messaging system called Hustle. Our team has sent 7.1 million text messages through Hustle. We have a predictive dialer, and we have phone bank 3.1 million New Yorkers. And I think that has made an enormous difference. We also moved to building a new campaign to reach New York's many immigrant communities. We created chat rooms both in WhatsApp and Kakao Talk and in WeChat. We also worked with our Complete Count Fund, where we had over 157 community groups that we funded, and we worked very closely with them and our citywide partners to launch these chat groups in 15 different languages. Our whole advertising campaign, so I'll talk for a minute about that. We thought it was so important to do our advertising campaign. We had 34 different campaigns. We had everyone from Cardi B to Alicia Keys in terms of celebrities, Lin-Manuel Miranda. But then we also had local New Yorkers really talking about what the census meant to them. We advertised in 27 different languages. We also ran ads on 150 different websites. So we think this was very important as well. And I think that the ads really resonated, because one of the things that we did with our digital ads is we monitored them in real time and changed them out quickly. So the ones that were resonating, we kept on longer. The ones that were not, we quickly changed them out. Our team has also been doing robocalls. We've done robocalls with a number of different key influencers. I'll mention one of them. We saw great success with our robocalls with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. For literally $1,000 investment, we were able to reach almost 40,000 residents in the New York 14 district, hundreds of which opted to be directly patched in. So we did a direct patch through directly to the Census Bureau so people could respond directly on the spot. I do want to mention that I believe it to be true that we are probably the first and only jurisdiction in the nation to ensure a nearly complete count of residents experiencing homelessness. And we also believe that we are among the very few cities to ensure a complete count of all residents living in public housing. The way we were able to do that is we entered into an unprecedented legal agreement with the Department of Social Services and the Census Bureau so that on the homelessness issue, we could make sure that the Department of Social Services provided a complete accounting of all of those in the shelter population to the Bureau. I can tell you that did not happen in 2010. And as a result, many in the homeless community were left behind. We brokered a similar data transfer between NYCHA and the Census Bureau. This is first of its kind. We think this should honestly be a national model that other cities should utilize. And we think that this is incredibly important to make sure that all of our residents in public housing were indeed counted and not left behind. So then again, in the interest of time, I will skip forward and just talk a little bit about the work that we have done with our partners. We had the most unbelievable partners in this effort. I'm so proud of our Complete Count Fund. As I mentioned, we quickly were able to put in place a process to grant to 157 community organizations, as well as our citywide partners. And these were trusted community voices on the ground that we were able to work with. In addition, we worked with 1,000 houses of worship. We worked with labor unions. We worked with elected officials. We worked with community leaders all across the city of New York about the importance of the census. And I think you really see it's a testament to where we are as a city in terms of census response numbers. So I will end on the note by saying that, look, we have basically 48 hours to go. Every single minute in the next 2 days counts. We don't want any New Yorker to be left behind. While the NRFU numbers indicate that New York State as a whole is approximately around 98%, again, we know that the door knocking data is simply not as reliable as self-response. So that is why our team has worked so hard to get to the self-response number that we're at. And that is why we're proud that we have been able to close the differential in the nationwide competition, largely between the nation and New York City versus 2010, and why we're very proud of the work that we've done compared to other cities. So I will end on that note. And of course, we and my team are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Menon. Next, we will hold questions from Chair Cabrera, followed by Councilmember Rivera, and then Councilmember Menchaca. Panelists, please stay unmuted if possible during this question and answer period. Chair Cabrera, please begin.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna be a bit unorthodox, and I'm gonna have the co-chairs of the census, Councilmember Rivera and Menchaca, to go first. So with that, let me turn it over to Councilmember Rivera, one of the co-chairs. Then I'll come back at the end.
Thank you so much, Chair Cabrera. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everyone who is here. I'm I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and I realize that this was an unprecedented pivot. So I just want to ask a few questions in terms of engagements and pledges and some of the marketing material. So I'll start there. So to date, how many total engagements, pledges, and completes have CCF awardees reported to the administration?
Sure. So I'm going to have Allison Terra, who ran our grants program, talk a little bit about that.
Thanks so much, Julie, and thank you, Council Member. It's been wonderful to be a part of this entire program, and we are so thankful to the City Council for your significant contribution to the Complete Count Fund. It would not have been possible without you, and we are so happy to be here today to speak about it. So thank you. The Complete Count Fund program officially ended just 2 weeks ago. So we are continuing to compile our final metrics and work with the awardees as they submit their closeout reports. Clearly, until yesterday, we thought we'd be working with them and getting those metrics throughout the month. Now, as we wind down these next 2 days, we're continuing to support them as they do their civic engagement work. But I will say that preliminary indicators show that we are very confident in the success of the Complete Count Fund. Many of them use our VAN database to report completes, and they also reported what are called soft completes, meaning that they perhaps didn't get the name of the person, but they were able to say, we spoke with 20 people who said they completed the census today. So as we compile that data, we will ensure the City Council receives it by the end of the month. But we will say that we are really pleased with the work. As Director Menner said, is 157 groups. It's in the hundreds of thousands. And we're just refining that data now, and we'll be sure to get it to you as soon as possible.
I understand. And I'm just asking because I wonder, sometimes when I was out there trying to engage with people with the US Census Bureau or with members of your team, sometimes like getting a pledge card wasn't the easiest thing. So, people still wanted to participate for sure. So I just ask in terms, I guess what I really want to know is what were some of the most effective ways that you found outreach to be successful? And I'll give you one example. I'm very curious as to maybe how we collaborated creatively. For example, the Board of Elections and people requesting absentee ballots. Were we able to work with them in order to?
Sure. So I'm going to thank you so much for that question. I'm going to talk about the Board of Elections because one of the things that we were really struck by, if you look at the Manhattan numbers, if you look at the numbers on the Upper East Side and Midtown and Soho and other parts of Manhattan, they are lower than they were in 2010. And so clearly we knew that there was a situation where some Manhattanites had left Manhattan and had either done one of two things. Either they didn't fill the census out at all, or they filled it out from the location they were at, because the census form talks about an April 1st deadline and where you are. And we had heard anecdotally that many New Yorkers did not fill it out correctly and filled it out from the second location that they were at. So we work with the Manhattan Borough President's Office. We went to the Board of Elections. We requested the absentee ballot data, and we did three things with it. A mailing to those individuals about the urgency of the situation, telling them they needed to fill it out as Manhattanites. And if they had erroneously filled it out, they needed to go online and correct it and fill it out as a Manhattanite. 2, we phone banked them. And 3, we texted them. So we really did a tremendous amount of outreach, and we did see the Manhattan numbers start to move as a result of it, but it's still a very stubborn problem. The other part of your question is that I think you were talking about what outreach methods did we find most efficacious. And I will say, we also ran a paid canvas operation. And one of the reasons we did that is we did not want to wait for the federal government to start door knocking. Obviously, during the height of COVID, we could not be out there having that kind of in-person contact that normally we would. But as soon as some of the restrictions started to lift mid-summer, we decided to bring out our own paid canvas operation. And that was highly effective and I think really moved the needle. And if you look at our numbers and how New York City was actually ranked #1 in terms of movement of any major city over the summer. And I really attribute that to a lot of the different outreach tactics, whether it's the phone banking, the texting, or the paid canvassing. So we really started to see those numbers move.
So would you say that's one of the most effective ways? That I understand that the in-person canvassing to me is super effective, right? As someone who has campaigned on a different issue, but slightly related, I'm just trying to figure out in terms of our investment and how we pivot, right? You had a very, very large marketing budget. You certainly were going to utilize some of those tools. For example, you used Hustle to send text messages. But how did you, I guess, also support those community-based organizations who are going to be very, very reliant on in-person outreach and who suddenly kind of change up what they were doing? And I ask because, just one second, I ask because a lot of them don't have a digital content manager. You know, they don't have a robust social media presence. And so you can do a robocall for $1,000 and get 40,000 people reached. How many people, you say people were asked to be hundreds of people patched in to directly get their census completed. So I'm just asking, what was the most effective and how did you support those community-based organizations, many of whom I think are still awaiting the rest of their award?
Sure. So yeah, Allison and Amit, do you want to take that?
And just the last thing I'll just say, since I'm out of time, is I wanted to know how you will determine which absentee ballot requesters you sent census flyers to remind them. I'm just wondering how you utilize that data. Thank you.
Well, I'll speak to the first part, and then Director Menon is the best one to speak to that last question, Council Member. You know, as you said, the Complete Count Fund, community-based organizations, these are true grassroots organizations. These are groups that had budgets as an entity from anywhere from 50K, then much larger ones like in the millions, for instance, health in, organizations like Somos. So these organizations look to us. Not all of them had digital directors. Many had to furlough staff with the pandemic. Just as we shifted our work for our field team, which Field Director Danielle, I'm sure will speak to, we also work to provide support to each of our CBOs that we work with closely. You know, they went online. We worked with them. We provided them with amazing graphics and social media toolkits that our digital team put together. We provided them in a multitude of languages, along with ensuring that our CCF awardees were proofing the languages to ensure that translations were correct and spoke to their communities. Further, we supported them with providing use of our Google Meet and our Zoom to ensure they could do virtual events. Many of us spoke on them. And then as we saw the city starting to reopen in June, we provided them with guidance to go back in person. Some of them just weren't capable or able to have their staff go out in the field, but we did provide guidance. We provided PPE. We provided our own staff and volunteers to ensure we could help them with tablets at their in-person census outreach. And like you said, these groups were not necessarily digitally, you know, ready to go on day one, but we provided a lot of trainings. We provided a lot of online support. Our data team provided a lot of technology support, as did our citywide partners, specifically the NYIC. We were able to ensure that our CCF awardees were able to use those virtual tools to get to all members of their community. They were able to upload their own lists, contact their own lists and communities, memberships, clientele. When they did so, they got very, very high response rates. Also, as they did their calls around casework, they were able to check in on individuals. How are you doing? How's your health? Do you need food? Do you need A, B, or C? And oh, by the way, can you do the census? So really, the reason why the selection committee chose these organizations is because they are part of the communities that they serve. They speak the language, they look like one another, they know each other, they're known entities, they trust each other. And that's why we think that the CCF, as the metrics are coming together, we're really proud of the work that the Complete Count Fund has done. And I want to say that all the council members and Chair Cabrera, how you've all spoken to that as well, that this partnership has been unique. And we've really provided the tools, weekly check-ins with every organization and more regularly if needed. So we really think that they were able to take advantage of the virtual tools, even if they didn't have the expertise prior. And then we were able to help them get out in the field once it was safe.
I'll quickly jump in to answer your last question. In terms of how we selected who is going to be contacted. We were able to get from the Board of Elections information about everyone who had requested an absentee ballot, who was registered in New York City, who had asked for ballot for the June primary, but asked for an absentee ballot to be sent to them outside of the 5 boroughs. So obviously we know there were a lot of people who requested it who were still here because they didn't want to actually go to the polls. So we simply contacted everyone who got a ballot outside of the 5 boroughs, but also while still in the United States.
Much.
Thank you, Councilmember Rivera. I'll now turn it back to Chair Cabrera, followed by Councilmember Menchaca. Chair Cabrera, please begin.
Thank you so much. Let me acknowledge that we've been joined also by Councilmember Rodriguez. Let me first, Director Mann, thank you. Thank you. You had to, before you a task that literally require Herculean effort, unprecedented. I don't know in any time in history, U.S. history, when a census was taking place, that you had to face what you face alongside with all the advocates that had to do nearly the impossible, and to be able to end up with the results that we have received so far. And I'm hopeful that in the next 24 hours, we'll be able to move the needle. And this is why I'm glad that we're doing this hearing today. And for all the members of the media, please help us out, get the word out. Most people don't know we have 24 hours. Matter of fact, is there any way possible that we could put forth a commercial in the next 24 hours? I know it's last minute, to let people know what are some of the ways that we could reach out to people to let them know that the clock is ticking.
Sure. So I'm happy to address that. In terms of putting out a TV commercial, that's not something budget-wise that we would be able to do. Digitally, we are doing that. You know, we're able to use all of our digital assets and digital resources. We have a whole social media toolkit that went out the second we had the new deadline. That's been disseminated far and wide. We have reached out to numerous members of the media. There's been a lot of media attention in the last, since the SCOTUS decision last night, and as well as today. So we are getting the word out. And then obviously we're working with all of our different citywide partners, you know, whether they be, you know, labor, houses of worship, or our grantees, really across the board.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me get to a few questions here today. How many phone calls, and I know you touched lightly on it, but if you could give me more detail. Today, how many phone calls were made through virtual phone banking and your dialer too?
Sure, we did three.
Let me just give you real quickly a battery of them, so a little faster, because I'm looking for a lot of data. How many unique individuals were reached via telephone? If you could provide a breakdown of how many phone calls were made and individuals reached by each entity, and in what language was phone banking conducted in?
Sure. Okay. I mean, in total, we have used a predictive dialer to make over 3.1 million calls. I will, and just on the texting side, 7.1 million text messages using Hustle. And then third, and then we can get into the details of it, the third big bucket is using WhatsApp, Kakao Talk, and WeChat, where we had 15 different languages, conversations on those apps, in large part to reach immigrant communities. So I will ask Amit Baga to also add in some detail on this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Chair Cabrera. Thank you for having today's hearing. So in terms of the exact number of unique New Yorkers or unique individuals that we've reached, we can certainly get that to you right after the hearing. Phone banking has occurred in multiple languages. I'll share a list of a few that I know for a fact that we've conducted phone banking in, and then Kathleen Daniel, our field director, can add. I know we've done English, Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Punjabi, Bangla, I believe Russian, and I know there are some additional ones as well. Kathleen, if you wouldn't mind adding.
Sure, you've pretty much hit most of them, and we've also been doing some text banking, which we'd love to share some numbers with you on. We were able to as well raise an army of over 10,000 New Yorkers that assisted us with this program.
Fantastic. In late March, you issued guidance asking Complete Count Fund, CCF, awardees to suspend their in-person outreach efforts and adjust their outreach plans to ensure consistency with public health service directives. How have the awardees adjusted to their outreach efforts in response to this guidance? Could you give us some example, and what in-person activity have been able to proceed as the city has reopened?
Sure. So Allison, our grants director, will answer that.
Thank you, Dr. Brennan, and thank you, Chairman Cabrera. Yeah, our program, we were able to pivot very quickly. The entire team census, as we like to call it, NYC Census 2020, was able to put together a plan, and we were able to effectuate it to ensure that the Complete Count Fund was part of that plan. Immediately upon understanding that this pandemic was a reality in mid-March, we were able to issue guidance stating, please hold an all in person, just as you said, Chairman. We issued that very quickly. We had several conference calls. We wanted to ensure that they knew that our guidance was like, we don't expect you to be in the streets. There's a pandemic. And we really got a lot of positive feedback from the awardees that we were understanding as a grant maker that we wanted to shift with them. So we were able to use the tools that some of my colleagues have been speaking to. We were able to ensure all were comfortable with using Hustle to Text, that they were able to upload their own list of their membership. They started using the phone banks even more than we had planned. We got the predictive dialer. They had their own predictive dialer events, as well as joined the ones that our field team organized, specifically focused on different communities. So over the first 3 months of census collection, our Complete Count Fund remained virtual, as did the rest of our work across Team Census. And they were able to do virtual events, town halls, and really it's in the hundreds, the number of events that took place over those 3 months online, which was really quite remarkable. And then really in terms of outreach in person, as soon as we issued the guidance, we found that many of our CCF awardees, either they had already been food distribution centers, or they opened up new food distribution centers at their locations in order to serve the communities that they are in. And they were able to pivot and have either our team members or themselves collect census and assist individuals with census intake at those food distribution points. We found that we were able to ensure that people receive the services they need, and that they understood the importance of the census and getting the money and the power and the respect that each of them deserve as they were waiting for their very much needed resources. And then we were able to just do some other really great things, like virtual DJ parties and in-person drive-throughs to do your census and receive a raffle bag for your children full of toys donated by local institutions. There's a lot of creativity, a lot of car caravans that the Complete Count Fund was able to pivot, and we're really just really have been taken away by the work that they've done despite the circumstances.
So you had a DJ party and we were not invited? We're gonna protest here. This is an injustice.
I believe they were all
epic
recorded,
level.
and I will say it was the CCF individual organizations who hosted. If we had someone ourselves, we would have made sure you would invite, Chairman.
On the food distribution front, if I could just add very briefly, I think that this is a very important point. Our team started to actually go out to food distribution sites starting in late May, because we knew that's exactly where New Yorkers were. The unfortunate reality of the situation with COVID-19 is that it's created an economic crisis that has obviously caused food insecurity to rise tremendously here in New York City. But we knew that that's where we needed to reach people. And so as a result, we've participated in more than 150 food distribution or mass distribution events over the summer. And these were almost exclusively with immigrant communities, and we did provide the correct language support. I do also think it's worth briefly noting that these were important, not just because this is where people were, but also because specifically we know that these are communities where self-response was really, really low. Corona, Queens is a good example of this. Where it's been sort of at the bottom of the list in terms of all of the neighborhoods across the city. for good reasons, and I'm sure you can imagine. But we were helping to fill out the census for households there that had anywhere from 6 to 12 members on average, which is a huge number per household. And so I think it just goes to show that some of these types of events that were really done in partnership with those parties were really important and very otherwise hard to reach.
Thank you. At this moment, I'm going to turn it over to the task force co-chair, Councilmember Menchaca, and I'll come back with some more questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Cabrera and Co-Chair Rivera. I want to say thank you to the census team. You've all been doing incredible work, and I hope you feel that love and appreciation. This was not easy. We went in with so much wind behind us and resources, and you were dealt the most crazy hand possible. And so I want to just let you know I'm appreciating that in a very real way. What I'm still curious about, and I had to step back into my other immigration hearing on adult literacy, is the connection with the state and the governor. Have you all answered that question and really kind of thought about how we can hold that administration accountable in this moment for the funding that could have actually helped so much and could help in the next few days if that kind of funding was available to the operation, the beautiful operation that you've built in every borough?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Council Member, for the kind comments. We really appreciate it. Our team has, it's not an overstatement and it's not trite to say we've literally worked around the clock for months and months and months on end. So we deeply appreciate the comments, and we deeply appreciate the partnership with the City Council, which has really meant a lot to us. In terms of the state was set to allocate funding before COVID, and then COVID hit. And, I don't need to restate obviously what happened. We all know what happened. The state has allocated through the Borough President's Office. So I know you're going to be hearing from the Borough President. So I, defer to them in terms of their comments on that funding. So that's basically where things are.
So no communication from the state at all about that funding?
No, I don't want to say there's no communication. I mean, we do talk to the state about census, obviously, and it's a top priority for us, but we don't control those funding decisions, so it wouldn't be my place to comment on them.
Okay, my colleagues have asked a lot of the kind of good questions about how the on the ground operations work. Maybe my question is really about the places that you saw that were not working, that you can kind of give us an example of what initiative was launched and you saw just no reaction to. I have my experiences in the district in Sunset Park. To Ahmed's point, there are places like Corona, Queens that were impacted greatly by COVID, and the deaths there are real. The fear is real. ICE raids have been real in communities like Sunset Park, and so we were trying to in real time figure out ways of communicating these messages. Are there things that did not work at all in your experience?
I don't have an example of something that didn't work at all. I would say perhaps if I were to identify the number one biggest challenge we had, it was combating, obviously, the challenges we had with COVID and not having the in-person contact that we needed in March and April and May to combat the Trump administration's misinformation. We needed that in-person contact for someone who is reluctant to fill the census out. Look, we phone bank them, we text them, we can have that virtual, but there's nothing like that in-person human contact with a trusted advisor that we were not able to do in March and April and in May. As Amit mentioned, in late May, we did go out to food distribution sites and we were able to begin that work. But that work we couldn't do in March and April. And so in the beginning of the census, where other states weren't battling COVID and weren't battling what New York City was battling, we were not able to have that precious in-person contact that we sorely needed.
If I may, I think Director Menon touches on a point that's really critical here. What we experienced was a lack of feeling safe from all New Yorkers, be it from the threat of COVID or the threat of the misinformation and the campaign to scare them from doing the census. And what we found, while we didn't experience a tactic that did not work at all, which is astounding, and we're very proud of that difficult work. What we did experience when our team went out to canvass and knock on doors was that people were less comfortable because they were coming to the door without masks, and not being dressed in the same way that they would be, of course, if they were in the street. We found community canvassing to be far more effective, which is different from the type of campaign and direct constituent contact or resident contact that we're used to. So when people were already out and already wearing PPE and already dressed a certain way, they were prepared to stop and have a conversation and happy to do so. So we found that direct communication was still the key and one of the most successful factors, but not door to door, but mano a mano in the street.
Yeah.
And have you and other council members join us for much of that.
Yeah. If I could just add very briefly, and thank you again, Chairman Chaka, for having this hearing today and for all of your incredible work on the census. To Kathleen's point, and as Director Menon has alluded as well, there really was no tactic that we think didn't work. And I do want to draw the committee's attention just briefly to some of the advertising, communications, and marketing that this campaign did, which was very different than anything that's been done in the past by any other city entity. Very specifically, we ran a campaign into which we pumped real dollars that was also very message tested with multiple different communities around the issue of the thousands and thousands and thousands of New Yorkers that live in illegal, largely basement units. By and large, as you know, and as everyone on the committee knows, issues that these New Yorkers face are extremely overlapping between poverty and immigration, obviously language access, and as a result, people have a lot of fear about participating in the census. It's a federal government activity where someone is asking you about how many people live in your home and what your address is and all of this. In addition to that, landlords themselves, the owners of these multifamily units that are not actually supposed to be renting out these basement units, often have discouraged or dissuaded their tenants from participating in the census for fear that somehow they're going to get in trouble with DOB. So for the first time ever, we launched a campaign, which we call Doubled Up, that we did in multiple languages. We did it in Spanish, we did it in Chinese, we did it in Punjabi, Urdu, Bangla, Russian, that really spoke directly both to landlords and to tenants living in these situations to say the census is completely safe. There are no questions about immigration. Your information cannot be shared with anyone and no harm will come to you. And just to sort of put a finer point on how we know this campaign was successful, the average click-through rate, which is the percentage of clicks that an image is getting when it is being shown online to whomever you're targeting, the average click-through rate for a city campaign is 0.2 to 0.3 of a percentage point. Average click-through rate for this particular campaign in the non-English languages was anywhere from 3 to 5%, which is just enormous. I mean, it's several times what the average click-through rate is for a city campaign. So, we're very proud of this type of very, very tailored and responsive work. And the click-through rates bear it out, but so do some of the anecdotes and the qualitative response that we got from community members.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful to understand how the technology works, and I think we're going to do a post conversation when this is all done, which is going to be sooner than I think we all anticipated. But I think these are going to be really important things to start integrating into other campaigns. So thank you for this work and this analysis that you're giving us today, and really speaking to this culturally sensitive but also linguistic sensitive messaging. What steps did you take to reach non-English proficient New Yorkers? In particular, I'm thinking a lot about our South Asian and Jewish communities. I think that these were communities that all of you were really focused on at the prep site when we're doing conversations with leaders. Are there things that you did in those two communities that worked really well that we can kind of look to now for the rates that are coming in?
Sure, I'll begin and then I'll turn it over to Amit. I mean, I'll first start with the Orthodox Jewish community, because this was something that we, from the get-go before COVID, had a concern about because of the historically low response numbers. We work very closely with religious and community leaders and elected officials in those communities. And we made a real concerted effort in terms of granting to organizations that had a lot of deep roots in those communities. And so I think that really has made a difference, because there was a lot of cultural resistance to completing the census that we had to overcome. And that was, very, very difficult to overcome. And it was really with those trusted leaders that it made a difference. We also did a tremendous amount of advertising in terms of Jewish publications, Jewish radio. We did a lot. And again, I think that helped to move the needle as well. And I think in the South Asian community, it's really, again, it was so important to have multilingual advertising in a multitude of different community newspapers. Remember, of the $8 million in advertising, we took $3 million and put it into community media. That is the largest amount the city has ever spent on community media. And again, I think that really made a difference. So Amit, I'll turn it to you to add additional information.
Thank you so much, Director Menon. It's a great question. I will emphasize, totally agree with Director Menon that language access was the very, very top priority for this campaign for all the reasons that we know that it had to be. And so we really went above and beyond. We have 34 campaigns in a total of 27 different languages. That is more languages than any city entity has ever done advertising in before to date. And we really wanted to make sure that our language was not the language we were presenting was not simply a translation, right? We all know that there are these large translation companies, they spit translations back out and they're sometimes very formal or very inaccessible. So we actually had a very rigorous process by which we put each and every single translation through a native speaker review and proofing process, which frankly did add a lot of time to our work. It did mean that in some instances, we weren't necessarily able to get some things out as quickly as we wanted. But what we knew is that once that ad was out or that a particular brochure was circulating, that the language was accessible, it was understandable, it was plain language, and it was something that people from the community would really understand. We branched out and advertised in a lot of South Asian languages. So just off the top of my head, and I may miss one or two, and if I do, I'll follow up. Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Bangla, Nepali. I believe we did a little, and I know we had some materials in Gujarati as well. We had PSAs that were in Gujarati, Hindi, and Punjabi. And we held multiple events with lots of different community organizations, both that were part of the CCF and also outside of the CCF. That I personally spoke in Hindi and Urdu at some of them. I've personally spoken Punjabi. And I should just note that the CCF itself also, and we're really proud of the selection process and what the selection committee was able to do. They really took a very critical and rigorous look at what the true makeup of the city really is and ensured that we were funding organizations, many of which were organizations that were receiving city money for the very first time, right, that really serve these communities. So when you talk about the South Asian community, you look at Desis Rising Up and Moving, you look at Chaya CDC, you look at United Six, you look at Adhikar. I mean, Adhikar in Elmhurst could not have been a more successful partner. That is also true for Chaya. I mean, these organizations really poured their heart and soul into organizing locally in their communities in the languages people speak. And it was a tremendous success. And I'll just end by saying in Elmhurst, the response, we have a large South Asian population, and Jackson Heights, response rates higher than we expected in some ways. And in other parts of the city where we had large South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities where the response rates were lagging, Chaya, Drum, also Jahaji Sisters, the Caribbean Equality Project, all came in, queer people leading the charge at the end of the census process to really get the community counted. And in the last few weeks, those numbers really did go up. So I really want to give them some credit for that.
This is beautiful to listen to hear, to have watched over time. And again, this is the celebration and the applause to your team and the hard work round the clock. I know you did not stop. And really, this is maybe my last question is, are you planning on really building out a retrospective report on the city census campaign after this is all completed? And when can we expect that? Partly because what I'm hearing really here is that you've all really built a new level and a new threshold and a new bar. This is how this whole city should be functioning under these kind of standards in engaging on all our messaging. That if this was in place 10 years ago and that we were going back to a warm apparatus, that you wouldn't have to build new ground to connect to these communities, that trust, even if ICE came, even if all the things and the messages that came down, you would have been funneling information and conversation with people who have already been engaged over time. This team alone can build the next pipeline of information and relationships to communities that have never seen this kind of engagement before.
Well, thank you so much, Council Member. We couldn't agree with you more. We first of all think this should serve as a paradigm for other citywide outreach efforts, but also a national paradigm on how you can conduct census outreach. And we've had many other cities reach out to us during this whole process. So obviously we want to be able to put this in some kind of report because we think it's incredibly important to codify this and have this as the model for future endeavors. So yes, we will work on that in the remaining time that we have left. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back to the task force co-chair Rivera. But for the sake of time, Director, if you could help us and the staff to give us we're going to do a rapid fire of questions because we know we have borough presidents and advocates waiting. If you could give us like the 30-second answer to each of these questions coming forward, that way we could build momentum and go through these questions rather quickly, which I'm sure you would be happy.
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Rivera.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask Mr. Salvo, I guess, a couple questions, if that's okay, or whoever wants to chime in. What do DCP's post-census operations look like? Does DCP have a process in place for evaluating the census count in the city after the census is completed? How do DCP support the city's census count during the self-response period? And were there any changes in the way that DCP supported the city's census count during 2020 compared to 2010?
Okay, I'll start with the last question. We published over the course of the census materials in support of the effort that you've heard about. There are 19 reports. They're all up on our website. We evaluated self-response rates and then what are called final enumeration rates by neighborhood, providing guidance to many of the people that you've heard from on this call. Regarding the post-census evaluation, we're part of an effort that is taking place to try to see how the Census Bureau went from a neighborhood that had a 40 or 50% self-response rate to 99%, because there are many ways that the Census Bureau can so-called close out a case that does not involve necessarily an accurate count of people in housing units. One example, proxy responses, as we call them. A neighbor provides a count. In general, those counts will be low. In general, those counts may not be accurate. So the result is that the city could lose population by virtue of an excessive use of that method. There is a movement nationwide now. There's a group of people, and we're involved with that group, that are trying to get the Census Bureau to provide us with information on how they completed the enumeration.
So right now you have the published materials, you're looking at the proxy responses. I'm trying to make sure I didn't lose anything there in terms of post-census operations, like in terms of working collaboratively.
There are a number of ways that the Census Bureau can complete a case. for a housing unit. They can declare a housing unit to be vacant through the use of administrative records or observation. They can delete a housing unit that they find does not exist. They can delete a housing unit by virtue of it being a duplicate. There's going to be a lot of concern about the post-processing of the data collection, which starts in a couple of days, and they're going to have to deduplicate cases. You've heard earlier that we reached out to people beyond the city who live in the city. Many of those people may have actually answered the census in two places. So we want them to be recorded as residents of the city. The Census Bureau will need to do that, and we will need to have feedback on what they did. And then finally, as you said, the use of proxy, and I mentioned the use of proxy responses, the use of administrative records, for example, from Social Security, from IRS tax returns, from HUD records, records from Medicare, all of that, those records can be used to actually complete an enumeration. How much of that took place in order to complete the enumeration in the city? All of these things have error associated with them, and we need to learn more about that.
Thank you very much. I know we have less than 48 hours. So whatever push there is in the next few hours, next couple of days, please let us know, of course, how we can be supportive and how we can make sure that we're reaching our constituency. We've tried a lot of different ways. And I know, Mr. Salva, you've been doing this a long time. So in terms of lessons learned, and I know we're going to hear from some others on the next couple panels, we're happy to collaborate and let you know as to some of our experiences. And of course, you'll hear about that through some of the questions we ask future panelists and advocates. So thank you so much for your work.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Here comes the rapid fire questions, Director. And so let's start with CUNY. How are the administration and CUNY, how do they plan? How was the use, actually, rather, on CUNY Census Corp students? How were you able to utilize them? What's the latest update with them?
Sure. Well, two things on CUNY. CUNY was a huge partner from the beginning, both with the Complete Count Fund and helping to administer that, and then through the students. Obviously, with COVID, it changed the way that the students could interact with New Yorkers, and that was an unfortunate reality of COVID. But CUNY have been a fantastic partner, and we're really thrilled with the work that they and the students have done.
I know back in May you had you had stated 178 students had signed up to work. Was that a sustainable number that we were able to retain? Did we get more?
Yeah. I'll talk, Ahmed and Kathleen, if you want to add in there.
So we had a fantastic experience with our students. We're able to swell to 220 CUNY students. And when some of them were assigned to our CCF awardees, and many of them were assigned to the field team. And then when, of course, COVID became our reality, many of them were able to move between teams so that if they were willing to go outdoors when some of the restrictions were lifted, they went outdoors with awardees or field team. And many of them not only participated in our phone banks and our virtual events, but they hosted them themselves. So they hosted some great events, participated in our Teleton, participated in our other cultural initiatives like My Counts, Que Cuente Mi Gente, like Conte in the H community. So they really were super troopers and became leaders themselves, leading NOC meetings, which are our neighborhood organizing census committees, and being the NOC in some places, because we had clusters of students, of course, from specific historically undercounted communities. So very proud of the work that our CUNY students did, and they became civic engagement leaders throughout our process, many of them still volunteering today, well after their program sunsetted in late August. So we retained the overwhelming majority of them, about 70% through the summer. And then some still are with us today in Sunset Park and Dyker Heights and are joining our census last call phone banks today and tomorrow.
Great. Thank you. And the shorter you can give me the answer, the better, because I have a lot of questions. In July, you provided data to the committee and the task force chairs on the Neighborhood Organizing Census Committee recruitment, stating that the administration have recruited over 5,120 NOCC volunteer. Has the administration needed to recruit more volunteers since then?
Yes, so and I think as Kathleen mentioned before, we had a total of 10,000 volunteers in our overall operation. This was really exciting. Neighborhood Organizing Census Committees was a new structure that our office created to involve 245 different neighborhoods in New York City in the census, and really to make sure that neighborhoods are invested in the future of their community.
So from what I gather, there are plans for engaging these volunteers and other civic engagement opportunities in the future?
Yeah, these are obviously very engaged New Yorkers, so we'd love to keep them engaged in the future of the city of New York.
So let me move on to questions regarding the agency and partnership engagement. Did NYC Census use the availability of real-time self-response data to adjust its outreach as needed? How did it pivot in outreach between collaboration with city agencies and partners in response to real-time self-response data and shifting public health directives?
Sure, I'll try to answer in 30 seconds. That's a long question, but
I know, sorry.
No, I'll try my best. We worked with every single city agency. There is no city agency that was not involved and engaged with us on census. Good. And so that is really, really important. Whether it be the Department of Education, the Department of Health, Department of Social Services, I mean, the list goes on, and they were all engaged. And yes, of course, we used real-time data. I mean, one of the advantages of having real-time online data every day is it made us more nimble in terms of how we could quickly send in teams to neighborhoods that had low self-response rates.
Thank you. How was NYC Census collaborated with the Census Bureau to count people living in nursing homes?
Sure. So, yeah, Amit, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yes. So as the director mentioned in her testimony, we have essentially achieved a complete count of everyone in shelter. As far as nursing homes is concerned, if the Bureau had trouble reaching out to any of the nursing homes, we would step in and make a call if we needed to. But by and large, the Bureau was able to take care of that themselves.
Beautiful. Public libraries. What steps has the administration taken to help public libraries conduct census education and all this census-related activity amidst COVID-19 crisis?
Well, the libraries were a key partner with us. We gave them a grant well before COVID because we knew that the libraries are key disseminators and trusted voices in their communities. When COVID hit, we then worked on a virtual strategy with the libraries, virtual events, the use of social media, the use of email blasts. So they were very helpful to us in terms of that.
That's good.
One thing that was very effective that I think the libraries did was they were able to repurpose some of their funds to send out multilingual postcards to targeted census tracts in various boroughs. So we really looked at what are the languages that are spoken, what are the response rates, and we ensured that the libraries were able to leverage parts of their grant to actually print and mail those postcards.
Very good. In late May, you announced a partnership with GOVOPS Seamless to award 10 gift cards worth $1,000 apiece to New Yorkers who recently completed the census. In July, you reported that 3,029 New Yorkers had entered the contest, and 1,083 New Yorkers have submitted confirmation that they had completed the census. Have additional individuals confirmed completion of the census since then?
Yes, because we extended the contest after the initial announcement, and then we also extended the contest to include gift certificates from Lyft, from City Bike, from the Museum of Modern Art. So we had other contests running as well. We'd be happy to send over to the committee all of the completions from all the different contests combined, if that's helpful.
Fantastic. That will be helpful. Really. Thank you. Charitable foundations. If you could just briefly describe the administration's partnerships with charitable foundations since July.
Sure. So I'm going to ask Amit to talk a little bit about that because we had numerous discussions with a number of different foundations. So Amit, do you want to take that one?
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, we've worked pretty closely with philanthropy throughout this process. They've been really great partners. As I'm sure you know, they've provided funds to many different organizations across the city. We did provide them with a lot of information about our CCF process, obviously nothing that was confidential, but really they've been great partners. In terms of since July, chiefly it's the Robin Hood Foundation that's been sort of most involved in providing additional funds for activities on the ground, and they have supported both our paid canvassing efforts as well as our robocall efforts.
So let me, thank you. Let me jump into questions regarding messaging and marketing. You answer a few of them, and I thank you for that. Since July, so let me jump into the ones that we still have outstanding here. Has the NYC Census introduced new messaging to ensure a complete count?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. New messaging in terms of?
To ensure a complete count.
Oh, from you're saying in this most recent time frame?
Yes, since July.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. So we constantly change our messaging. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we ran 34 different campaigns, and that was really important because if you keep sending the same message again and again and again, people tune out. So we constantly rotated our digital messaging, our TV messaging, our community newspaper messaging, radio, and I think that really did work. And on the digital, we can tell what worked. We could tell how long people spent on each of our ads, whether or not they click through, because all of our digital ads had immediate call to action with a click through directly to the Census Bureau to complete the census.
Beautiful, thank you. In response to COVID-19 crisis, you allow CCF awardees to make their own and buy, let me take that back, to make their own ad buys using 25% of their budget funds. In July, you said that 21 of them had taken advantage of this opportunity. Since July, were there any additional awardees that utilized their funds for ad buys? And if so, how many and what languages and groups you were targeting?
Sure. So yes, we allowed them to go to a cap of 25%. Many did not go that high because they wanted to keep their funding for other things, but they found that it was a good way to pivot their dollars to reach the populations that they work with. It was 3 additional organizations, including those that published in Spanish, English, and Yiddish. So they were able to reach different communities in their own outlets and in their own languages.
Fantastic. Let me turn it over to Councilmember Rivera. I believe she has a question. Is that for later, Councilmember Rivera?
It's for Jeff. I think he's going to testify in the next panel.
Okay, great. Thank you. Have all the changes to the response deadline affected your operations? I would imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, this is can only best be described as an unpredictable roller coaster. And when you are constantly tell people that the finish line is moving and rotating and changing, it accomplishes really what they intended from the start, which is confusion and causes people to be fearful. Well, should I respond to this? Why does the date keep changing? Is this legitimate? So it's really upsetting that this happened, and it's unconscionable, and quite frankly, it's shameful.
I can only imagine if we didn't have COVID-19, what our numbers we had end up with, you know.
Could I just add to that, because I think it's important to state on the record, we have an incredible team of more than 60 very dedicated New Yorkers who have lived through sort of an unspeakable psychological battle with this shifting deadline and with COVID. And I think it is just really important for us to thank all the members of our team, as well as every employee of every CCF awardee and partner for their tenacity in dealing with constantly shifting.
Indeed, they need to be affirmed, acknowledged, celebrated. Truly, many of them took risks. I know I had an event in my district, and workers came out, we're out there in the public, and there's a level of exposure and risk they were taking. So I salute every single one of them, and a tremendous effort that they put forth. And that's why we see the results that we're seeing right now, even under the circumstances that we're working with in the city that literally got hit the hardest when it came to COVID-19. Only got a couple of more questions. You'd be happy to hear that. Is NYC Census planning to issue a comprehensive retrospective report on the city's census campaign after the count is complete? And if so, when do you expect it to be completed by?
Yes, we will issue a report, and I can't give you the exact date because honestly, the next 48 hours, we're just focused on getting the count out. But we have always intended to do the report, and we will issue it as soon as humanly possible.
As a matter of fact, I believe that's my last question. The rest we'll send it. We'll send it. I know you're busy, as you can imagine. I don't want to hold you any longer. I know you're dying to get back to control center, if I may call it. I thank you. I really, from the bottom of our hearts, I know from our community to all your staff, fantastic work. I can only imagine the pressure that you were working on, and really you should be applauded for the work that it was done. And I'm sure we'll hear that from the advocate, from the other groups that were directly involved in the front line. And so with that, I turn it back to the moderator, but thank you again. I can't say thank you enough. Literally, this is going to bring resources to our districts, and as council elected officials, we fully know the impact that these fundings, federal funding, will have in our district, and we need it more than ever.
Thank you so much, Chair Cabrera. Thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to the moderator at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call on council members in the order they use the Zoom raise hand function. Council members, if you'd like to ask a question and you have not yet raised your hand, please do so now. You'll have a total of 5 minutes to ask your question, receive an answer from the panelists. The Sergeant at Arms will keep a timer and will let you know when your time is up. Once I've called on you, please wait until the Sergeant has announced that you may begin before asking your questions. Seeing no hands raised, we'll now turn to testimony from the Borough President's offices. Each panelist will be given 3 minutes to speak. Panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. The first panelist to testify will be Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, followed by Director Susie Tannenbaum from the Queensborough President's office. Borough President Brewer, you may begin upon the Sergeant's announcement.
So thank you very much to Councilmember Cabrera, and I certainly want to thank Julie Menon and her staff, and Jeff Baylor, and Jolie Golden, and Joe Salvo. I'm just going to summarize because I know that you're going to get a copy of our presentation. We know that there's millions of dollars. We know that representation is all at stake. I think you know that Manhattan in 2010, we had a 66.2% self-response rate. And right now, today, it's 62.5. So we're really, lacking tremendously. So what we have tried to do, we obviously heard earlier from Julie Menon about the New Yorkers who relocated out. It really was us that called the department, the Board of Elections. We got the 35,000 names of those who had left from the June primary, as you heard. We helped pay the cost of the mailing. We did it with the League of Women Voters because it's a very impartial group, and they did get a pretty good response. You have to know though that that is the census tract. Those are the census tracts that in the past responded 75%, and now it's around 50%. So you can see that's why, particularly in Manhattan, our numbers are lower. I think we were the only borough to do that, and I certainly want to thank everybody who participated. We also mail postcards at our own expense, the Borough President's office, to 240,000 Manhattanites who live on the lowest performing census tracts, and they were sent first class so that they would not get lost, and other reasons you can imagine. We also bought ads in the East Hampton Star and other papers in Connecticut, upstate New York, trying to say, fill out your census with your Manhattan address. We also worked hard, as you can imagine, with the Manhattan Complete Count Committee in the very beginning. And as Carlina Rivera knows, we went to Providence, Rhode Island, even a couple of years ago. Jeff joined us to say, how are you doing it in Providence? Because you are the pilot for the online action. With our Manhattan Action Fund, which is our nonprofit, we did our own allocation of funding. And September 29, we awarded money to 12 organizations. And then you heard recently about the governor's funding. It was a lot less than what we expected. And it came in late, but we were the first borough president to get the money out. We got it out in August. That was money from the Empire State Development Corp. And we gave $215,000 to 15 additional organizations. And if you can imagine, we were out on the street with them. I think you heard earlier how important the in-person is. There's nothing to do anything but make sure that's how it works. So we also had back to day action. We went to almost every single school in the borough of Manhattan on September 29th. And so those are some of the ways, in addition to census cookies. So we're very depressed about the short time frame, but to give you some ideas of what we have accomplished. Finally, I just want to say we went to REBNY, we went to all the building management companies in Manhattan where it was hard to get in, and between 32BJ and REBNY, we really were able. That's not self-reported, but it got enumerators in, and it also gave an idea about who's in that apartment, at least by name, by enumeration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we will hear testimony from Director Tenenbaum. Director Tenenbaum, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Okay, thank you. It is my privilege to present this testimony on behalf of Borough President Lee. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Cabrera and members of the committee for convening this public hearing on the importance of the 2020 census to the 5 boroughs of New York City. This census has been quite a journey, particularly for the borough of Queens. In March, when the coronavirus hit, we found ourselves at the epicenter of the pandemic. Not surprisingly, neighborhoods like Corona and Elmhurst with high levels of COVID-19 had low self-response rates in the census. Queens is tremendously proud to be the most ethno-racially diverse county in the continental US. But when it comes to the census, our exceptional diversity presents unique challenges. In this political climate, even after the federal government's failed attempt to add a citizenship question to the census, our undocumented immigrants and our mixed status families were reluctant to be counted. Also, our African-American communities in Southeast Queens and the Rockaways have historically been undercounted, and initially response rates were persistently low. Yet Queens was determined to secure its fair share of federal funding through the 2020 census. Already in November of 2018, my predecessor, the Honorable Melinda Katz, announced the formation of the Queens Complete Count Committee, a diverse and vibrant network of trusted community partners committed to ensuring that their neighborhoods get counted, and my office has fully sustained this commitment. Since February of 2019, the Queens CCC has met on a regular basis, strategizing across neighborhood and cultural lines. We have benefited from the expertise of many great colleagues at NYC Census 2020, the US Census Bureau, the Population Division at City Planning, ABNY, and Queens Public Library. Our trusted community partners have been incredibly resilient. When the pandemic hit, they moved their census outreach to virtual platforms. Our office partnered with NYC Census 2020 on a weekly phone bank that contacted over 40,000 Queens households. When socially distant in-person activity became permissible again, my team joined with our census colleagues and distributed thousands of branded masks and hand sanitizers while providing questionnaire assistance at food distribution sites and transit hubs. Funding from the City Council, the Mayor's Office, the Governor's Office, and the Borough President's Office has been essential in helping our community partners to launch their own rigorous and creative Get Out the Count campaigns. All of these efforts have paid off, whereas Queens ranked number 4 among the 5 boroughs for approximately 1 year. We are now virtually tied for second place with Manhattan. As of this week, our census self-response rate is 62.3%, which is above
Time's expired.
which is above the city average of 61.4%. Can I say 2 last sentences? The federal government's decision to bring this critically important process to a screeching halt is devastating to our borough and city. Thousands of Queens residents will lose their chance to self-respond, but rest assured that our borough level operation will continue until the very last moment when the census portal closes, and we thank you for your support.
Thank you so much. Just a quick question. I don't know if you mentioned it. I don't recall. Do you happen to know and clarify how much of a census grant did you receive from New York State to either one of your borough office?
Yeah, we got 215,000 in Manhattan.
Okay, and for Queens?
And we were allocated almost 500,000. Given the diversity and the populations that were at risk of being undercounted, we received almost 500,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. I want to thank you both. I happen to know Borough President Brewer since she was a council member, and I can tell you I don't know any harder working elected official than Borough President Brewer. So I know you gave it all you had in there and under very unusual circumstances. So thank you for both of your offices and everything that you have done to really to get the numbers to where we're at. I don't have any other questions unless the task force chairs have a questions. I see a no. And so with that, we'll move on. Thank you again. Salute you for your dedication and hard work and for the results that you got. But we still got less than 48 hours. So let's keep moving that needle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me turn it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call on council members in the order they have used the Zoom raise hand function. Council members, if you'd like to ask a question and you have not yet raised your hand, please do so now. First, we will hear from Councilmember Kalos. Councilmember Kalos, you may begin when ready.
Thank you. I never pass up an opportunity to interrogate our borough president when she comes before the council to testify. My first question is, which is the best borough in the city of New York? And I was kind of disturbed to hear that we had fallen behind and just really appreciate all the hard work. What should we be doing in the next day or so to make sure that Manhattan beats the other boroughs in terms of census response rates?
Well, as you know, Councilmember Kalos, the problem is Staten Island is hard to beat. It has to do with the fact that so many Manhattanites left, and I assume Staten Islanders didn't. So I think the answer to your question is, the only thing you can do is keep the pressure on those who have left to fill it out in Manhattan. So whether that's the private school list, which we've tried, the synagogues, the churches, many of which are in your district. So that's what I would do. Is the count problem is those who left, to be honest with you.
And the best borough?
Well, of course it was the best borough, but says it without saying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next, we will hear testimony from Jeff Baylor, New York Regional Director for the United States Census Bureau. Regional Director Baylor, you will be given 3 minutes to deliver your testimony. Please begin once the sergeant announces that the timer has started.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much, co-chairs, task force members, and members of the council. We have over 11,000 partners in New York City on the 2020 census who held over 10,000 events, hosted over 2,600 mobile questionnaire assistance sites, and made over 17,000 commitments. And that's just when they partnered with us. It is because of the amazing work of our partners across every borough and every level of government, across every race and ethnicity and houses of worship, and across community-based organizations, that we should all celebrate the achievements of this census, the most difficult census in our nation's history. The Census Bureau, specifically the team at the New York region, thank all of you for your tremendous efforts, your outreach, serving as a true trusted voice in your communities. Your efforts have clearly made a difference. And then there's another group I want to recognize, the group of 17,564 New York City residents who took an oath of confidentiality, completed training virtually, and knocked on doors in their community and their neighboring community, which made non-response follow-up a true success. I was asked to give the latest schedule, and of course, as a result of last night's announcement, has changed dramatically. We will continue to support any planned mobile questionnaire assistance events through tomorrow evening, October 15th. Any mobile questionnaire assistance support planned for events that were being held October 16th through the end of the month, October 31st, will be canceled. For non-response follow-up, our door knocking activities, we have until 11 p.m. tomorrow evening, October 15th, to knock on doors and collect data via our NERFU operation. We will not have staff enumerating that late, but we will have every remaining case to be resolved in the hands of someone who has work availability both today and tomorrow. As of this morning, we had 2,367 cases to work across New York City, majority of which are quality control or field verification cases, of which 263 were added to our workload this morning. Currently, we're at 99.88% complete on non-response follow-up as of this morning. And I want to note and stress again, our workload on non-response follow-up is not just cases that have yet to respond, but cases in which there may be a quality issue or we need to verify an address. Internet self-response will be available across the nation through October 15th until 11:59 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time or 5:59 a.m. Eastern on October 16th. Phone response will be available for its regularly scheduled time on October 15th. So for English and Spanish language lines, they're available until 2 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday, October 16th. And the non-English, non-Spanish language lines are available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Paper responses, for those who still have a paper form, must be postmarked by Thursday, October 15th and received by Thursday, October 22nd. I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide the updates, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Let me turn it over to the co-chair of the task force, Councilmember Rivera. She had a few questions.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. You've been very busy, and I know you'd extend the deadline if you could. So we'll just leave that there. Please, can you share the successes and some of the lessons learned about conducting a safe yet effective in-person non-response follow-up? I know we heard from the borough president, for example, that this was something that definitely happened in my district, that some people were being denied access to some of the apartment buildings. So we thought creatively, we involved 32BJ, we spoke to revenue because of the building managers to make sure that they got that access. That's one example of like a lesson learned and things we can do differently. I thought about, you know, introducing legislation, making sure that they had to be granted access, and we just didn't have enough time. But something like that, any lessons learned given the last few months?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that stand out. First off, partners who've donated space to allow us to conduct trainings virtually. Now, two pieces of that. First off, the training itself, the in-person piece, was only about 2 hours. We had to bring people in, swear them in as a census employee. They take the oath of confidentiality. We give them the device, and then we send them home to do their training online. So getting space to do that was extremely helpful. And we've had so many partners throughout the city donate space for those purposes, but also the ability to use a space and computers. Many of our employees didn't have their own laptops or computers for use at home, so they needed a place to go to. And partners did a wonderful, amazing job at providing that space. And probably one of the most important things during non-response follow-up and how our partners support us is exactly what you said. getting us access into buildings, providing Director Menon talked about the ability to provide proxy data from the public housing, which we'll use it in the event we need it at the end of the census. But just getting us access has been a tremendous help in ensuring we can knock on doors, because outside of self-response, the very next best thing is having that conversation at the door and collecting that information from someone who lives in that household.
How did you had some issues in terms of the NRFU app, but we also know that the Bureau intended to hire roughly 13,000 enumerators in New York City. How many did you end up hiring for NRFU? And for example, how, if at all, did the Bureau attempt to recruit individuals who lost their jobs as a result of COVID?
Yeah, great question. So we kept our online recruiting systems up throughout the COVID crisis. Originally, we were scheduled to stop recruiting at the end of February. The decision was made to continue to recruit people, through the COVID crisis, because what we were finding is as we were offering jobs to New York City residents, they were no longer interested, or maybe they were in a high risk category that wouldn't allow them to go out there and knock on doors in their communities. And we certainly understood that. So what we had the ability to do is to pull certificates to hire some of the most recent individuals in areas which we were struggling in finding someone to work for us. So we were able to pull certificates that had the people who most recently applied because we know they were interested. We know they wanted to be considered for these positions. So we were able to do that and hire over 17,000 people, enumerators, to work on non-response follow-up. And that's one of the strategies. Again, I know, and don't get me wrong, an extra 2 weeks, absolutely, we would have got more self-response. But we also front-loaded some things that really were a true advantageous to get us where we're at right now today in terms of non-response follow-up. And the first is we started 8 days earlier. We're supposed to start knocking on doors August 11th. In New York City, we were ready to go. Our offices were up and running. We had staff trained. They were eager to get out there, so we started on August 3rd. We provided incentives. This was not part of our original plan when we were going to start knocking on doors August 11th. So we tried to get those people who were working, rather than working 20 hours a week, would you consider working 25 hours a week? Those that were working 15, could you work 20 hours a week? And that increased the productivity of our enumerators. And then finally, replacement training. So we did not stop hiring in New York City until September. We were scheduled to stop hiring in July, train at the end of July for enumeration to begin August 11th. We continued to hire and train. As we lost someone, we hired someone new to come in and take their spot, to take that device, to ensure we had the maximum amount of people we could have out there knocking on doors.
I know we've come a long way from our Rhode Island visit. I guess my last question is what were the accountability measures in place, and what did the Bureau implement to ensure that there was training that really covered the health and safety guidelines that the enumerators had to follow? From what I saw, people were very, very careful in terms of those who were going door knocking, for example. What was that training like?
Yeah, so it was something that was created kind of on the fly because we never had planned on doing virtual training. So there was a module that was specifically COVID-19 related, which talked about, washing their hands. It talked about if they're feeling ill, not going out to work. It talked about how to wear your mask properly. And we provided masks to all of our employees. We even provided masks to our employees to give to respondents in packages of 5 as they were knocking on door to try to make it safe. We incorporated social distancing. There's no need for a NRFU enumerator to go into someone's home. They can knock on the door and back up 6 feet. And, even the Center for Disease Control had issued a joint statement with our director that opening your door to a census taker was low risk as a result of some of these policies and procedures we put in place. Now, it wasn't perfect, but because we had some people who didn't want to wear a mask. And as we learned about those individuals, as we were told, from community members, we took the appropriate action regarding lack of following the guidance that we provided.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it was really, really effective to go and meet people where they were at. So thank you for all of your work and all the time and the commitment that you gave. I'm going to turn it over back to the chair, who I think also has a couple questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Rivera. Just two quick questions. Number one, how many mobile questionnaire assistance, the MQA events were conducted in New York City since March 12th? I think you're in mute mode.
Okay. All right, yeah, so we conducted over 2,600 and still counting. We just had one signed up for Brooklyn tomorrow, but over 2,600 mobile questionnaire assistance events. And I have to stress, that is probably the one lesson learned. This was not a planned activity of part of the 2020 census. This was something that was developed late in 2019. And I think this was a huge success because our partners, and I see Susie there, who I don't know how many Queens hosted, and I know Borough President Brewer as well. That was awesome because, and I know Councilmember Rivera did some as well. Having that trusted person there talking about why the census was so important, and then just giving them that ability right then and there. I know New York City Census did their own. Which were a huge success in communities throughout. So that's something that we definitely need to build off of for 2030.
How does that compare to other major cities?
Great question. I don't have that data. I can tell you certainly within the New York region, which covers from New Jersey, New York, all the way up into Maine and Puerto Rico. Clearly, New York City had the most amount of mobile questionnaire assistance sites.
Okay, my last question, does the Bureau believe the requested extension into April 30th, 2021 for delivering apportionment counts to the President and into July 31st, 2021 for delivering redistricting data to the states are still adequate? Does it still stand by those requests? Does the Bureau anticipate needing even more time to deliver the data?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish it was one I could answer, but I don't have all the data or the facts. All I can tell you is that, back earlier this year when COVID-19 hit, we provided a plan, a replan, and that replan was based upon statutory relief from that December 31st date, which is why we extended data collection through October 31st. I don't know if that statutory relief will get approved or not. As of right now, as I understand it, December 31st is the date in which we had to provide the apportionment files to the President. And I guess we'll see over the next 2.5 months if anything will change.
Wow, does the Bureau have enough staff to accomplish that in this short amount of time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, that's not something we do in the regions. That's really a headquarters task. And certainly I would not be the best one to try to even address that.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to the moderator who will be calling up on council members for questions.
Thank you, Chair. I would now call on council members in the order they have used the Zoom raise hand function. Council members, if you'd like to ask a question and you've not yet raised your hand, please do so now. First, we will hear from Councilmember Kalos. Councilmember Kalos, you may begin when ready.
Thank you to the chairs. I guess I just have some very specific and technical questions. Any of the elected officials sitting here have had to deal with a much smaller problem and task than you've had to deal with in terms of just identifying people who will go out and vote. And in New York State, we have some of the worst voting laws in the country. So it's actually quite difficult to vote, at least before the pandemic. And even now, just trying to get an absentee ballot. Now it's gotten easier, but in the primary, it was incredibly difficult too. So I guess for the census, where it's just literally a matter of getting somebody to go online and fill out a form, which is incredibly easy, or just call a number. So I guess my question is just, what technology are we using, do we have at our disposal to match up every single address in New York City, New York State with the people who we expect to be living there so that we can do a directed canvass?
So directed canvass in terms of census related work, or are you talking in terms of polling?
For census, so knowing that as of whatever credit report or voter registration record, that Ben Kalos lived at this address. We can't get a response from him, from whoever lives at this address now. Let's do whatever we can to track down the person who we think might live there.
Yeah, so I think that's some of the analysis that Dr. Salvo was talking about earlier that we'll see after the census data are tabulated. Certainly, you know, getting someone to self-respond is the best way for someone to fill out the census. It's the best data, the highest quality data at the lowest possible cost. The next best way is knocking on that door and having that conversation with that individual. Now, we know we have administrative records that we can use in the event at the end of the census in which, you know, we have a household that has not responded. But it's not a one size fits all. And in certain areas, their administrative records are very strong. In other areas, primarily the areas where self-response rate is the lowest, this is where the administrative records are probably the poorest. And that's why, again, working with our partners, and especially, I can't stress enough, these mobile questionnaire assistance sites have been fantastic. So we've been working with the city, you know, early in the decade through the local update of census addresses to ensure that the city, that the U.S. Census Bureau have every possible address where someone lives or could live, which is the basis of ensuring we get a complete and accurate count, and then working with partners as we're knocking on those doors. And I know it was a common concern. Many people got multiple knocks on their door because we believe there may be multiple units within that single family structure, but weren't converted. So I don't know if that addressed your question. But
I guess the frustration, because of the secrecy oaths, et cetera, for census, you are the only ones who have the information on who responded and who didn't. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, due to Title 13, we can't share that information with anyone.
So I guess my frustration is, as an elected official, where I think I'm in a high information district where there's a lot of administrative information available, but we have fallen behind. And so I guess it's just frustration. Just a question of just like, how can we just target those who have been unresponsive? And in the campaign world, if I want a voter, if I can't get them at the door, I'm gonna get their email address, I'm gonna call their mobile phone, hell, I'll even call their family members until I get that person to respond. And that's just talking about a vote, not like whether or not we get billions of dollars in federal funding. So I guess it's just, how can we use the same tools and technologies that many of the elected officials here have used in the next, I guess, 24 to 36 hours to really leave a no stone unturned approach to getting everyone to respond?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing that I can think of is using the tools, you know, the self-response, that where areas, neighborhoods with low self-response, that has been the areas in which we've had to knock on doors the most. Those are the areas where we have probably the greatest probability of getting proxy data versus data directly from, there's just more chances to get proxy data. So that I would say would be the focus. I mean, we have data either directly from a household or via proxy for all but 2,367 addresses in New York City as of this morning. So it's really, we're hopeful that some of these people who maybe they would never open up their door to us, maybe they're hearing a message, maybe they're going to see something tonight, maybe they're going to go by an MQA event and self-respond, because that self-response will supersede that proxy data that we collected from their neighbor on, you know, who lived in that particular household.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kalos. We will now call on Councilmember Menchaca.
Starting time.
Thank you. Jeff, I just also want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. And two quick questions. One, will you commit to coming back to the council in front of the committees, the task force, and work with us to really build a 10-year plan? I feel like we engaged you a year and some ago where we probably could have benefited from working with you and the learning that this pandemic has offered you. Could you come and join us for a conversation?
I think that's Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. I will commit to doing that. And the other thing I'll commit to is we have a wonderful program, a data dissemination program that teaches the public how to use this data that we're collecting when we release it, you know, whether it's for grant writing purposes or emergency management planning or just for basic community planning. It's a free resource. And I think it's a great way to couple the conversation you're talking about with also helping your community members and learning how they can use census data for their benefits.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And then the second question is, there were some questions about the workforce itself and how you adapted. Did you receive any issues from staff that were already in motion and before COVID entered into COVID world? And are those things filed? I think I'm anticipating some issues that may have come up that might not have been presented that we can also solve. And I'm talking about your staff, the federal staff, and do those get collected, and can we learn from that as well?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I understand motions as far as issues employees had in the work they were conducting, or?
Yeah, the work. I really want to hear from workers in terms of what happened on the ground, PPE issues, any of those kind of things that are going to be, I think, important for us as we compare both the city effort and the federal effort.
Absolutely. I think if it's, as long as it's not anything, you know, tied to Title 13 data or talking about specific experiences on knocking on particular doors in a community, I think that information can be shared. And we catalog
Awesome.
every concern we receive.
Beautiful. That'll be kind of after all of this. And then the final question is, I was on a phone call with some folks in Texas, and they are doing really well. They're already counting the number of new Congress people that they're gonna have and the new dollars that are coming in. Are you already seeing, and will you be able to see this kind of analysis and data about how the execution happened state by state, city, urban center by city, urban center? And is that something we can expect in terms of information? And do you have some learning to share right now about other cities that did it just differently? I feel proud of what we've done here in the city of New York, but it'd be great to kind of work with you to get colleague information about other cities.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we could pull together. I talked earlier about all the partners that signed up to partner with the Census Bureau for 2020, as well as the commitments and all the events they hosted. We certainly have that available nationwide, and we can pull that from the largest cities. And I'll just tell you from my experience, this is my third census. I worked in the Dallas region in 2010 and in the Detroit region in Census 2000. I have never seen a partnership effort as I've seen in New York City. I've never seen, and it started back when that whole citizenship question debate, and there were some very loud voices, and they kept that momentum going all the way through the census. And it's been an honor to work with all of you and all the partners, throughout New York City. I have never seen the effort, the perseverance, and the re-engineering as a result of COVID-19 that I've seen from New York City partners.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear testimony from representatives of the public library systems. Each panelist will be given 3 minutes to speak. Panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. I would now like to invite Jin Hyun Bae to testify, followed by Jay Brandon, and then Iman Poe Maynard. Jin Hyun Bae, you may begin upon the Sergeant's announcement.
If I may, we already have an order set. Thank you very much. It will be Jay who will be testifying first, and then myself, and then Iman. Would that be all right with the with you and everyone else?
Sure, that's fine. Please go ahead.
Jay.
Great. Good afternoon.
Mr. Brandon, I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, I was. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Jay Brandon, the Civic Engagement and Community Partnerships Manager at the New York Public Library. I'm joined by my colleagues Aman Power Maynard, Civic Engagement Manager of the Brooklyn Public Library, and Jen Hugh Bay, Civic Engagement Manager at the Queens Public Library. I'd like to first start out by thanking the City Council Speaker, Corey Johnson, Chair Fernando Cabrera, other members of this committee, and the Census Task Force co-chairs, Council Member Carlina Rivera and Carlos Menchaca, as well as the City Council for holding this meeting and your tireless support of libraries and the services that we provide to New York City. Additionally, I would like to thank the New York City Census 2020 Director Julie Menon and the entire Census 2020 team, the Complete Count Fund awardees, and specifically the U.S. Census Bureau's New York Regional Office for their ongoing collaboration. We're grateful to the Council for this opportunity to testify to you about our work and ensure that all New Yorkers were counted in this 2020 census. For over a century, the libraries have been a committed community partner and vital hub. We have over 217 libraries across our diverse city, and we are a trusted partner in conducting this democratic effort here in the United States. As essential providers of information and opportunity for all essential providers of essential information and opportunity, libraries are aptly suited to ensure New Yorkers are counted and to disseminate accurate information. As a key citywide partner, the three library systems developed a proposal that reinforced our strength as community conveners, provided crucial technology and internet access, as well as offered a trusted and safe place for patrons to be counted. In preparation for our work to support the census, the New York Public Library, Brooklyn, and Queens Public Library created an extensive plan to connect hard-to-count communities to vital information and technology resources. 110 of our branches were identified to receive additional census support, technology, collateral, and programming. This included staff. We teamed up with the U.S. Census Bureau to host hundreds of census job recruitment sessions in our branches to build early awareness and later drive self-response rates. We prepared hundreds of dedicated devices to allow for quick and easy access to the census websites, averting possible scams and long lines for public computers. To ensure patrons fully participated in the census at our neighborhood branches, the three library systems collaborated on a culturally competent marketing campaign designed to engage New York City's diverse communities and drive self-response rates. Each library system hired a team of multilingual census navigators who began visiting branches, training staff, and reaching out to other CCF awardees and partners, preparing to launch census programming. Brooklyn Public Library navigators began visiting every Brooklyn Public Library branch, 59 in total, to deliver comprehensive census and community service training to each team member. In addition to its own comprehensive training, QPL navigators assisted in information sessions for frontline staff, children's librarians, and after-school specialists, as well as established new and deeper connections with organizations working with undercounted populations. QPL collaborated with City Council member Daniel Drum and Barry Gorodnichik to host recruitment fairs in Elmhurst, Glen Oaks, Bellerose, Queensville, and Queens Village libraries. NYPL navigators scheduled census cafes, public programs offering census information in English and Spanish, and established partnerships with organizations such as the Apollo Theater, the National Black Leadership Commission on Health, to reinforce the importance of census in familiar community spaces. Along with NYC Census 2020 and other citywide partners, libraries began preparing for citywide open house events on April 1st, Census Day. We had We Count family story times, cultural events to attract new patrons, and interactive programs to welcome all New Yorkers, specifically those most impacted by the digital divide. Census messaging was incorporated into existing channels such as ESOL classes, New American workshops, early literacy story times, and other adult programming sessions. By the week of March 12th, the official launch of the census self-response period, libraries were fully prepared to execute a sophisticated prompt comprehensive, full-scale in-person campaign to get an accurate count through engaging programming, easily accessible kiosks with technology at branches, fully trained staff, and partnerships with local CBOs, and then everything changed. I'd like to pass it to Jen.
Thank you very much, Jay. So the COVID-19 pandemic affected our library systems, as it did many other organizations, shutting down locations and disrupting our in-person outreach plans. As New Yorkers faced a new reality, we shifted our programming and engagement online. As trusted community voices, we know that when we speak about the census, our patrons take note. So we continued to prioritize sharing news and information. We coordinated with NYC Census 2020 on messaging to maximize the impact of social media campaigns and newsletters. Our newsletters reach a combined 2 million subscribers, and NYPL's NYPL Connect and Book of the Day newsletters in particular reach 1.2 million. Libraries continue to share PSAs via online programming, including story times, ESOL classes, and older adult programs. Our city, state, and federal representatives also delivered PSAs, and on QPL's Facebook page, their videos have garnered over 17,500 views. Turning to census-dedicated programming, our navigators were absolutely crucial. BPL's navigators hosted Q&As on BPL's social media accounts, a teen census panel, and a teletown halls in Spanish and Bengali with CUNY Census Corps and other local partners. QPL's navigators brought together the US Census Bureau, NYC Census 2020, CUNY Census Corps, and 11 local partners for 10 Q&As held in 10 different languages. Navigators also played a critical role in other engagement opportunities. As census experts who speak a variety of languages, they were very well suited for executing direct calls to action. They assisted in citywide phone banking and staffed library census support lines. And last but not least, we continue to train our staff and stakeholders to be effective census advocates. BPL and QPL held census ambassador trainings, inviting volunteers, donor groups, and board members. NYPL's navigators led a census-focused conversation for a virtual staff conference. And now I'd like to pass on to Iman from Brooklyn Public Library. Thank you.
Starting time.
Census completion. Census navigators, along with library partners and volunteers, safely expanded census outreach outdoors as our neighbors return to the new normal. Recognizing that 1 in 5 New York City residents don't have reliable broadband access and that some may not engage with virtual offerings, the 3 systems brought census messaging to people's doorsteps. In collaboration with NYC Census, we conducted a direct mail campaign to target low-responding neighborhoods across the city. We placed multilingual posters in high-priority zip codes and conducted billboard campaigns in high-traffic, hard-to-count neighborhoods. Brooklyn Public Library put resources into multilingual outreach across the borough. BPL's collaboration with the YMCA of Greater New York and New York City Census produced 2 Call Out the Count virtual phone banking sessions in August and September, reaching over 4,700 households. Census navigators also collaborated with the Census Bureau and local partners to begin tabling outside of BPL branches and across Brooklyn, from community boards to churches to affordable housing units in low response neighborhoods. In August, BPL's Bookmobile joined the NYC Census March for Racial Justice Caravan, which traveled from Sunset Park to Prospect Park. In September, the library held 2 census tailgate events featuring the Bookmobile back to school giveaways, music, and food distribution from the Campaign Against Hunger. At the end of the month, BPL hosted Skate for the Census, which provided free roller skate rentals to participants who completed the census. In addition to collaborative direct mailings, posters, and billboards, BPL promoted census messaging on Link NYC screens, waiting rooms across hospitals and doctors' offices, and on self-check kiosks at our grab-and-go branches. Additionally, BPL recently donated 58 cases of the We Count 2020 Census Picture Book to partners. Earlier this summer, New York Public Library collaborated with local stakeholders to integrate census messaging in the delivery of services and resources. Collaborations with Uptown Grand Central and East Harlem helped connect census messaging to the Latinx community, and partnerships with Assembly members U-Line Now and Charles Fall strategically targeted diverse communities with proportionately low self-response rates. As NYPL began its first phase of branch openings, it partnered with the Census Bureau to establish outdoor tabling events in a scaffolded approach that utilized its street fronts as enumeration hubs. The library partnered with elected officials to publicize and provide PPE and school supplies at mobile questionnaire assistance events, which helped enumerate over 200 households. NYPL also co-hosted the virtual program Community Actions, Benefits, and the Census, featuring Q&A with Census Bureau Regional Director Jeff Baylor. The library continued to host virtual programs that kept participants informed on key census updates and prepared weekly census emails for frontline branch staff. Almost done. Queens Public Library Census Team helped support the U.S. Census Bureau and community partners with MQA events across multiple locations, as well as outdoor food distribution sites, health events, transit hubs, and more. The QPL's bookmobile was also deployed at a Richmond Hill event, co-organized by the Queens Borough President's Office and community partners. QPL hosted 5 census back-to-school events with library friends and co-organized Queens Gets Counted, Queens' marquee event for New York City Census Week of Action. The library also deployed street teams who counted 1,100 households in Flushing, Corona, and Richmond Hill. In October, QPL supported the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, CHIA, CDC, ADHICAR, and the National Black Leadership Conference. The concerted outreach of our 3 library systems aligned with the steady increase we saw in several hard-to-count communities over the last 2 months. Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, who had the most hard-to-count populations in the state, saw their self-response rates beat those of 2010. We knew that achieving a 2020 census complete count in New York City was going to be a challenge with the added complications brought by the pandemic. But New York City's libraries took on that challenge. We had to pivot quickly, and our partnerships were invaluable as we safely engaged with as many New Yorkers as possible to increase the count. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now turn to public testimony. I'd like to remind everyone that unlike our typical council hearings, we will be calling on individuals one by one to testify. Each panelist will be given 2 minutes to speak. Please begin once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should use the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call on you after the panelist has completed their testimony. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you and the sergeant at arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. I would now like to welcome Mita Anand to testify, followed by Wenny Chin and then Howard Shi. Mita Anand, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Thank you so very much, Chair Cabrera, co-chairs Menchaca and Rivera, and members of the Committee of Governmental Operations and the 2020 Census Task Force. I am Mita Anand, Census 2020 Senior Fellow at the New York Immigration Coalition. The New York Immigration Coalition serves as the convener for New York Counts 2020, and through that, I have been acting as the facilitator for New York Counts 2020, and I'm delivering my remarks in that capacity. For well over 2 years, New York Counts 2020 has been working through its partners, many of whom are here with us today, to achieve a fair and accurate census. I want to thank the Council for their amazing partnership, as well as our partners, and of course, New York City Census. And I would thank Jeff, but he disappeared. At this point, I'm not going to emphasize all the work that we have done, but I want to direct people's attention to something that's already been discussed, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about response rates and what accurate and quality response rates look like. The Census Bureau has articulated a goal of having 99% of households enumerated. Today, we heard Jeff Baylor say that New York City is at 99.8%. What we know is that we have rushed to get to that number, that with NRFU, the non-response follow-up, that the Census Bureau is twice as likely to miss people in a household that would otherwise be counted if we were using self-response. We also know that using administrative records to count people hurts our most vulnerable communities. It hurts young children, it misses Black men, and it misses our immigrant communities. These are communities that don't really have those administrative records available. And we also know that the Census Bureau has been relying on proxies after trying to reach households after only 3 times versus 6 times. So what we're saying is when we hear 99 point, I will just conclude with this. When we're talking about that, and we're talking about this shortened, truncated processing period that has to end by December 31st, we are looking at the possible undoing of all of our hard work. And it's incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can to pressure the Commerce Department, the Census Bureau, the Congress, to make sure that we get our statutory reporting deadlines extended so that all of our hard work does not get put to waste. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Wendy Chin to testify, and then Howard Shee, followed by Katie Lowenberger. Wendy Chin, you may begin upon the Sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Cabrera, co-chairs, and members of the committee. I'm Wendy Chin with the New York Immigration Coalition, convener for New York Counts 2020. For the past 2 years, NYC and our partners have been working on the Census 2020, and there have been many hurdles, both anticipated and not, and I want to thank the Council for their partnership through this long process. While the NYC, our partners, and NYC Census 2020 have shown amazing efforts to increase self-response, the census has been subject to many headwinds with which we are all familiar. The continued assault by the Trump administration targeting undocumented immigrants, confusion over the end date, the diminishing number of groups on the ground, and the shortage of MQAs. Sorry, Jeff. As we chase towards the finish line, we must continue to do everything we can to further encourage self-response. I know there's only 36 hours, but in the past few hours, NYC had just launched a text bank in Brooklyn and a series of robocalls with Whoopi Goldberg in the Bronx, because communities at risk of being undercounted are not coincidentally the same ones most affected by COVID-19 and chronic underfunding. Let's get that 0.01%. So now I ask, what is left to be done? 3 things. 1, disseminate. For the next few hours, 36 hours, mention the census at every single event. Leverage every partnership. 2, advocate. We are concerned that the urgent data processing will lead to more distortions that will hurt our communities of color. We need to make sure Congress extends the statutory reporting deadlines for the census. And 3, empower. Despite the census enumeration coming to an end, City Council still has an opportunity to make sure New Yorkers' voices are heard. This city, home to over 3 million New Yorkers, immigrant New Yorkers, many of whom have held the front lines for us during the peak of the pandemic response, are left out of the electoral process. We urge your support for Intro 1867 to empower 900,000 New Yorkers with a vote in local elections, a step towards acknowledging the diverse voices and expanding the representation in our city. We're proud of what NYC has done in face of the pandemic and an administration hostile to successful census. But what we have learned from the past 2 years is that when we work together collectively, we can achieve great results, even despite the pandemic and an antagonizing administration. So thank all of you for your attention to this issue and your partnerships.
Thank you. I would now like to welcome Howard Shee to testify, followed by Katie Lowenberger and then Lena Cohen. Howard Shee, you may begin upon the Sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Chair Cabrera, and thank you to Council members Menchaca and Rivera and the City Council at large for your unprecedented support for civic engagement on this particular issue. I'll cut to the chase. The decennial census is the primary source of high quality data on Asian communities and Asian ethnic groups, and it's vital for representation and advocacy for our communities. I want to highlight 3, well, actually, first, I'm hoping that this is just the start of a conversation about what worked really well for the census and what needs to be, what challenges we had and what needs to be improved, so that we can document this so that 10 years from now we're not starting from scratch. So I do want to highlight three things that kind of came up during this process. I think that the city's unprecedented investment in census outreach has enabled a great deal of planning and the creation of an infrastructure that's been put in place to well before the start of the 2020 census in March. Unfortunately, a lot of the planning had to go out of the door because of COVID, but I think the city census office, I want to give kudos to them to pivoting to providing a lot of resources for text and phone banking, a lot of virtual engagement, and enabled community partners to make use of that sort of that lost time in March and April and May. Nevertheless, we knew that virtual outreach was never going to take the place of in-person outreach, especially among our Asian immigrant communities. And so in our testimony, we showed the improvements that happened within the Asian community in response rates where the Asian community lagged behind the city overall self-response rates in the beginning of May. But once we started doing in person, the Asian outreach rates surpassed that of the citywide rates. That just shows the value of in-language, in-person outreach done by trusted voices in the community. And then finally, I think I hope that we in the City Council continues to invest in this civic engagement infrastructure. It would be a pity to have to rebuild it 10 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Katie Lowenberger to testify, followed by Lena Cohen and then Elizabeth Angeles. Katie Lowenberger, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Carlene Buccino, and I'm testifying on behalf of Katie Leonberger, President and CEO at Community Resource Exchange, or CRE. And on behalf of CRE, we want to thank the New York City Council Governmental Operations Committee and the 2020 Census Task Force for holding this important hearing on the 2020 census in New York City. CRE is a nonprofit that provides consulting services to social sector organizations. We serve more than 500 organizations a year, both here in NYC and across the country. And last year, we worked with, strengthened, and advised hundreds of groups leading the charge on today's critical issues: immigrant rights, racial equity, health, education, housing, hunger, and policy advocacy. These groups provide vital community-based services that are lifelines to New Yorkers. And last year, CRE was extremely grateful for the council's support as we partnered to train and support nonprofits and CBOs to pursue census outreach and education. Thanks to your funding, CRE supported 250 organizations that have in turn reached tens of thousands of New Yorkers with their census outreach. Our sessions enabled people to conduct teach-ins within their neighborhoods, equipped frontline healthcare workers to answer census-related questions, and have trained and helped complete Count Fund awardees to conduct census education in our new virtual world. Throughout the pandemic, we've supported the nonprofit sector as a whole by convening with organization leaders, providing customized consulting support, and offering crisis-focused webinars for organizations facing difficult decisions. Nonprofits have continued their unwavering dedication to ensuring that New York City gets a fair and accurate count. After yesterday's announcement, we know we can't wait another minute. All of us involved who care about this city need to do everything we can to ensure that as many New Yorkers as possible are counted in the next day and a half. From organizations doing critical outreach work, local government agencies supporting this effort, New York City residents who can help get the word out in their neighborhoods and communities, as well as go online and complete their own census information.
Time expired.
You can wrap up if you'd like.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. CRE remains committed to continuing our partnership with the city and its nonprofit partners to reach as many New Yorkers as possible and secure its fair share of resources and representation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Lena Cohen to testify, followed by Elizabeth Angeles and then Julio Rivera. Lena Cohen, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Hi there. I'm Lena Cohen. I'm testifying on behalf of United Neighborhood Houses. Thank you so much, Chair Cabrera, and to the City Council for this opportunity to testify on the census. Just for background, UNH is a policy and social change organization representing 44 settlement houses across New York City, and our network reaches over 765,000 New Yorkers each year, all through the lens of delivering holistic services to families and local communities. With big thanks to the City Council and of course the leadership of Council Member Rivera and Council Member Menchaca, UNH was identified as a citywide census partner, which was incredibly helpful because therefore we were able to support our 19 member settlement houses that were also complete count fund awardees. So we participated in the citywide coordinated effort to make phone calls, to collect pledge cards, and to do so much more to really connect everyone living in New York City with the type of support they need to understand their role in the census, as well as the within the broader context of democracy in New York City. UNH is committed to a complete count because the census is about money, power, and respect, and we want to do everything to ensure that people have voices in our city. Which brings me to my last point, which is really, again, looping back to democracy. Immigrant New Yorkers have not only been historically undercounted in the census, but also disenfranchised from elections, despite having lived here, worked here, paid taxes to New York for years. And so that's why I also wanted to say that UNH urges the City Council to pass Intro 1867, legislation introduced by a member of this committee, Councilmember Udanis Rodriguez. This legislation would amend the city charter to permit lawfully present residents to vote in municipal elections.
Expired.
And I'll close by saying that the current pandemic highlights the critical need for expanded enfranchisement as well as long-term engagement among all of our residents in New York to ensure that people really do have a say in the direction of our city. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. I will now welcome Elizabeth Angeles to testify, followed by Julio Rivera. Elizabeth Angeles, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Elizabeth Angeles. I am the Senior Director of Advocacy at the United Way of New York City, and we are so thankful for the council's investment and partnership in the Census 2020 efforts. We really believe that investing in organizations that have had the trust of those who have been historically undercounted has been the right focus. And for 80 years, the United Way of New York City has partnered across community, business, and government to support low-income New Yorkers. A complete and accurate count has been core to our mission, particularly as we think about supporting programs that many low-income New Yorkers access. And since the start of the Complete Count Fund, we have served as a network convener. We helped guide the development of the New York City Census 2020 campaign plan, the development of the Complete Count Fund goals, and we facilitated collaboration among community-based partners. We also had 5 staff members as grant managers, providing support for 66 of the 157 awardees, where we reviewed weekly reports, helped awardees adjust to the virtual environment and challenges of the pandemic, among other responsibilities. Our managed awardees account for over 94,000 completes, and more broadly, we've reached over 275,000 New Yorkers through our outreach. As both a citywide partner and CCF awardee, we've partnered with Hester Street and Robin Hood to host convenings for organizations to share best practices and recommendations on how to reach communities. We recently launched a microgrants initiative with Robin Hood and Hester Street called the Census Last Mile Grant, where we host weekly calls with updates. And so in conclusion, we've all worked together to reduce the gap between the national self-response rate and our cities, and we come to the City Council to share these experiences and highlight a few key asks. First, one of our goals as part of this effort was to build greater civic engagement through our outreach. We asked the New York City Council to allocate resources to continue the work of supporting community-based organizations in building civic engagement, particularly in communities that have been... May I finish? that have been historically disconnected across the city. And second, we ask that the council capture all that we have learned to draw from this for the next census. And the New York City Council has the power and resources to invest in research and analysis that can help us effectively document what has worked and what we have learned. And finally, we ask that the council invest in census outreach every decade and begin to plan for the census much earlier than we did this year to ensure that we have a complete and accurate count for New York in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will now call on Julio Rivera to testify. Mr. Rivera, you may begin upon the sergeant's announcement.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chairperson Cabrera, Chairperson Rivera, Chairperson Menchaca, and members of the Committee on Governmental Relations and the 2020 Census Task Force. Thank you for extending the opportunity to deliver this testimony today. My name is Julio Rivera, Northeast Civic Engagement Campaign Manager for the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO Educational Fund. NALEO Educational Fund is the leading nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that facilitates full Latino participation in the American political process, from citizenship to public service. In view of the dynamic nature of New York City's population, securing a complete and accurate count of all residents in 2020 is of paramount importance to the city's future. This task was daunting even before the coronavirus pandemic disrupted daily life and activities. The NALEO Educational Fund has consistently found that self-response rates trend lower as a concentration of Latino residents of a tract, city, or county increase. In addition, the share of the city's residents who are young children, one of the most likely subgroups to be undercounted in past censuses, is larger than the national average. Due to the pandemic, get out the count mobilization was challenging because it had to shift from an in-person to a digital operation. These methods were not always the most effective in reaching the city's hardest to count population, who may not tune into a census town hall or find themselves on a phone bank call list. The extended census timeline also forced stakeholders to conserve resources and continually adjust messaging. The Bureau's frequent changes to its plans frustrated its community partners. Most recently, the Bureau's moved to shorten the deadline from the announced date of October 31st, and the related legal battles created an environment of uncertainty and confusion as to the final deadline for residents to be counted. Moreover, NALEO Educational Fund is concerned that data collected from large numbers of New York City households during the non-response follow-up operations is likely incomplete and omits some households that should and would have been counted if counting had taken place under better circumstances. We thank the city for its efforts and foresight in funding an unprecedented outreach effort. The diversity and collaboration between partners was invaluable, but we also urge the city to continue being engaged and vigilant on census policy and the delivery of accurate census data moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. At this time, if your name has not been called and you wish to testify, please raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand function. Okay, seeing no hands raised, I will now turn it over to Chair Cabrera for closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Before I give my closing remarks, I want to give an opportunity to Councilmember Rivera and Councilmember Menchaca for some final words, and then I'll come back to close it up.
If it's okay, I just wanted to ask the panelists that are left a quick question. I wanted to thank you. I know that some of you continue to provide essential in-person services, and maybe it was food distribution, maybe it was just helping those who aren't necessarily digitally savvy, just go on with day-to-day responsibilities. And I thank you for that. I especially know my community-based organizations here took census outreach very, very seriously, and I give them so much credit, whether it's good old Lower East Side or Cooper Square or Vision Urbana, and the work that we did specifically in public housing was really important to me. I wanted to ask, as your organization did outreach, what was maybe the most common response regarding the census that you received from individuals? Anyone can chime in, sorry.
Maybe since we have a few different panelists, if you have an answer, feel free to.
Maybe Howard or Wendy, or well, Wendy, I know because we were doing textathons, or who?
Oh,
No,
I guess I got
please,
unmuted.
yeah. I know when I was out there, I received a lot of different kinds of responses. Some of them were, I don't receive benefits, or I'm not a citizen. I am just trying to figure out how I can always get better at outreach and how we can do this, you know, much better in terms of whatever we need to do in reaching New Yorkers that are historically marginalized and have really been targeted by this federal administration.
I will give an example from my staff. Basically, it comes down to there's this one individual who just was adamant about not wanting to fill out the census, right? Saying that it was, I think he thought it was a conspiracy, a distrust of government, and that kind of thing. But I think having a conversation with that individual and just showing that the building, you know, just over a short period of time, a bond, and saying that, you know, you do matter, and then showing that you know, and the giveaways also helped in getting people to engage. And once you have that conversation, that person actually turned around and started bringing his friends over. I think part of it was there's, you know, certainly giveaways help, but I think just having a conversation with that individual and showing that there are people from the community that really care about the census and that there is a reason why we're out there pushing for it, those conversations go a long way. And I think it just comes down to having an individual conversation and finding the thing that the person cares about and tying it to the census, because we can find censuses in all parts of our lives, and there's always a way to tie it to it. So I think that's the way we ended up connecting with people.
Jay Brandon from the New York Public Library. I'll add, just looking in to answer the question, but also thinking about it holistically, as some of the folks have talked about the ongoing sustaining effort. I believe it was Councilmember Menchaca that talked about looking to build for 10 years ahead. The collaboration that the New York Public Library and the library systems in general had with the U.S. Census Bureau, I think, was very fundamental to us being able to offer a number of mobile questionnaire assistant events at our branches as we started to go throughout our reopening. I think the collaboration that we took to engaging with elected officials around the city, we worked with a number of council members, a number of assembly members, to host events at our branches that allowed for cross collaborations between the two entities, the library or the elected official, to tap into all of our networks to be able to disseminate information to community members around these events that were happening, to be a draw. And then from there, the Census Bureau was able to provide staff members to take their responses. Looking at, you know, as those are efforts to get the count, recognizing to answer specifically the question that the council member asked, folks largely, you know, the interactions were of reservation and hesitation, having fear of interacting with government officials. While the census doesn't have a law enforcement aspect to it, it is still a U.S. government exercise. It's still a government exercise that involves passing along information. And so oftentimes when we were engaging with community members, when we did our first initial set of town halls to ask some of those questions, that was some of the feedback that we got. Is that folks, you know, just have a fear of, you know, what it means to engage with the, you know, with the government in that manner. And I believe having opportunities for the collaboration with elected officials and other community partners allowed for us to push past some of those challenges.
So at the New York Immigration Coalition, we actually put together a very specific messaging package to deal with the issues we knew regularly came up. So to be, you know, directly responsive, it was questions like, if I have a visa, why do I have to respond to this? The government already has my information. So I think some of us were already ready for the questions of misinformation, disinformation, fear of government, but it at some points came down to really logistical moments of saying like, no, this is a separate counting operation. So through the education work we did leading up to the get out the count moment, we were able to figure out what those questions were. So it was questions like you referred to, like sometimes it's, I'm not a citizen, is it me? Other times it's, well, you know, would a child count? Why would you count children? They can't vote. And I think a lot of it is that importing of norms from other parts of our lives and assuming that they apply to the census, and finding the language in the ways that Jay and Howard explained, and finding the partnerships that they explained, but finding the language to make sure people understand, like, no, this is applicable to you. I think what was unfortunate with COVID is that moment to have that longer conversation was diminished. And it really is that longer conversation. And we knew that going into it, that it would be the longer conversation that was important. So when people say, well, it doesn't apply to me, they might just keep walking down the street because they don't want to then stop and engage in a COVID era about like why it actually would apply to them.
I just wanted to add something from Community Resource Exchange experience to build on what Howard, Jay, and Mita shared. So building on the work that the New York Immigration Coalition and other partners had done around kind of messaging and key concerns, we built out a couple of scenarios and used that in a lot of our teach-in training. So we were reaching kind of nonprofit staff who would be working directly with community members, talking with them about the census, and ensuring that those kind of trusted messengers had key messages, kind of elevator pitches, quick sort of responses in their pocket for those different common concerns that we knew different community members might be concerned about: living arrangements, language, religion, social security numbers, citizenship, et cetera. So making sure people had really concise, easily memorable talking points that were readily accessible, whether it was in person or virtual. So thanks to all of the partners who did the groundwork on that.
Yeah, and to add a little bit on, agree with everybody's statements thus far, but I think that's where Title 13 and confidentiality come into play and why it's so important. I think one of the main barriers when you're talking about the hardest to count communities is that mistrust and that distrust that that information is going to be used against them, right? When I'm living doubled up, when I'm living in untraditional households, I may not have all of that information for the other people that live in the same housing unit as I do, or I may fear giving out that information. So it's reassuring folks that their information won't be used against them, and making sure that that information, that message is also coming from those trusted messengers, right? It's the community groups that the city so wisely funded to do this outreach work, and it is from elected officials like yourselves, council members. You're all trusted messengers in your own communities. So I think making sure that that message is coming from that right messenger is also key.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And that's all the questions I had, Mr. Chair. That's exactly it. We needed you, and you all stepped up tremendously. So thank you. Thank you from the very beginning, from the court case to wrapping up our early morning efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, Councilmember Menchaca, final words?
Yes, thank you. Incredible gratitude right now for everyone that spoke and those who weren't able to be here because they're on the ground right now doing the good work. I do hope that we can learn from the incredible investment, the human sweat equity, the capital that you put in, not just the $40+ million of funding that came in from the council and the city, but your own wisdom, that it does not dissipate, that it does not dissolve and disappear, that it actually helps build the next apparatus for the city. That is what I'm interested in doing right now. I think that's the legacy that we can leave for everyone as we get closer to the next in 10 years, which will happen. It will come. The question is, will we have built what we need to solve the problems that we're seeing and we're confronted with? And I'm looking forward to working with all of you on this. And my hermana, Carlina Rivera, our co-chair, and then our chair, Cabrera, as well. I do see a moment in the future where we can bring you back into a setting like this. Hopefully it's in person, but if not, that we still commit to that time. And I hope you can make that commitment today to come back and really work with us to build what we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to take a moment to thank the task force chairs, Menchaca and Rivera, for the incredible work that you did, the investment of time, your passion, your presentation to all the council members, how you were able to be so engaged with everyone that was involved. I want to thank all the advocates that are present and those who couldn't come to today's hearing, but you were all in the trenches. I salute you. I thank you. What you did made a difference. As a matter of fact, made a difference beyond what we often realize in a very direct way. You're champions, and but our job is not done. As you stated so eloquently, we have 36 hours to go, and then we're going to have to push for extension, because as it was mentioned, it could go all down the drain. And we don't want all those efforts to be for naught, because that will be very discouraging for the next round in 10 years. So thank you. I want to thank the administration for the investment, Speaker Johnson, for all the resources that were allocated. And I want to thank the staff. You were incredible. I always call them the dream team staff. Thank you for all the work. You guys are marvelous. And with that, we conclude today's hearing.